bad.
What's up? Another episode of Ripple Effect Podcast. I'm your host, Ricardo, also known as Ricky Vance, and a great episode for you today. Today we have Timothy Picciott, also known as Liberty Advisor. He's on Instagram as Liberty Advisor, but you can go to thelibertyadvisor.com, and I'm sure he's also on Odyssey and Library. We discussed this on the show, so I'll put all those links in the show description, and he'll also discuss on the show where he is and where he isn't anymore. And then we also have John Sneisen, who is from the economictruth.org. I'll put links to his website also in the show description. He's also an author. And then I have Alex Krainer, who is an author and a really interesting guy. I love chatting with him, so I'm glad that he got to join us. Alex has also been on a Union of the Unwanted. He's been on my show as a solo guest, and which was a really fun discussion. All these guests have been on my show a bunch of times, so go back in the archives, check out those shows. Also, I'm letting you guys know that I am now, and I'm excited, that I am now on Float. So float.app. Check out that platform. It's a great alternative to Facebook and Twitter, and you can upload actually your whole archives, every piece of information from Facebook. If there's pictures and stuff that you're worried about losing, you can have them all on your Float account. And then also Odyssey or Library, counting on which website you're using, odyssey.com or library.tv. Library.tv does have an app, but I think odyssey.com looks much cleaner. Now you can find Ripple Effect Podcast on there. If you search Ripple Effect Podcast, you'll find my channel. I am also on Picciott, and I think Picciott has the most of my videos. I think that's all up to date. And then the Union of the Unwanted, the other show I do. I do that show with Charlie Robinson from Macroaggressions, Sam Tripoli from the Tinfoil Hat Podcast, Midnight Mike from the OBDM show, and the four of us have a show called the Union of the Unwanted, which I'm sure many of you guys are familiar with, but it's become its own show. It has its own YouTube channel, which now the archives are completely up to date. All the shows are there, so check those out if there's past ones you haven't seen, or if you want to start from the beginning and see how it all came about. I actually have the very first Swapcast the four of us did that sparked this idea, and then you can go down the line and listen to all of them. We also have our own RSS feed, so it's available on iTunes and I believe Spotify. If not, it will be on Spotify soon, but it's on just about every podcast app. So if you have a hard time finding specific episodes or you want to listen to all of them in order, subscribe to us, rate the show, review the show, all those type of things. Do that with my show, the Ripple Effect Podcast, and then our show, the Union of the Unwanted show. The Union of the Unwanted also has an Instagram page and Twitter account and a Float page. And of course, if you want to support my work, all my work, I have a Patreon page. If you support me on Patreon, I'll let you know in advance all the projects I'm putting together, people I'm collaborating with, future guests, all that stuff. I have a merch store, the Ripple Effect Podcast merch.com. So the rippleeffectpodcast.com will lead you to my website where you can find all my audio, and I also have links on that website to all my other accounts. But the Ripple Effect Podcast merch.com will lead you to my merch store where you can get hoodies, t-shirts, tank tops, mugs, all that stuff. Any way you can support the show is awesome. I have a PayPal account. I'll put that in the show description. So if you want to tip the show, you can. I know times are tough, so review the show, rate the show, do all that stuff, and that goes a long way. Let's do this value for value system where if you get some value out of these conversations, then try to contribute back with some value. That's it, guys. Enjoy the conversation, and I'll see you on the next one. Peace. Coronavirus and the COVID-19 and the big pharma agenda, but what's everybody's opinion on like the economic agenda, right? Like, are they trying to collapse things? Are they trying to get rid of currency as a whole? Like doing, because you hear a lot of those theories, right? Like they're just trying to get rid of money. They're trying to push like the universal basic income, like all these theories. And I brought together three of the smartest people I know in regards to these issues, and I figure you guys will have some really well thought out opinions on some of these topics. Does anybody have a opinion on some of this and a prediction and want to share it?
Alex looks to.
I can wait. Just go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, no. Well, it all started on September 17th last year, 2019. When, of course, we had the what's called a repo crisis, which is a market. It's like a repurchase operations. It's called. It's basically where banks goes to secure lending overnight to make sure that they're, have enough reserves to be solvent, like to actually stay and not go bankrupt. So what happened was that suddenly the interest popped, from I think it was like 2.5 something percent up to 10% overnight, which is an insane spike. Like it's something that you never really see ever, and so that happened. There were full panic. Somebody was not wanting to borrow to someone. All the big banks and hedge funds. We don't know who he was yet. That we don't know, but we do know that started this whole crisis that now has been papered over with, that was protected by the whole COVID virus that came out. Remember how we used to have the Yellow Vest movement? Everybody was out in the streets. They're still to some sort of way now, but now it's kind of illegal.
Well, I think there's one important aspect of it that you're sort of glossing over, because the average person who's listening to this, doesn't, when we say repo markets and things like that, they're not really fully understanding what we're saying. So when people hear the Fed funds rate or the interest rate or the Fed is keeping rates at zero, what they're ultimately referring to is the rate at which the banks are, generally speaking, lending money to each other overnight. So some banks, let's say, need to keep, and this is in the olden days as of 2 years ago, because now the banks don't even have to really keep reserves. And there's actually a video of I almost said Ben Bernanke, but Jerome Powell on video on CNBC saying, that we don't have to keep reserves anymore. But anyway, so let's go back to the olden days of 2 years ago, year and a half ago, where banks had to keep about 10% in overnight reserves. So some banks will have 11%, some banks will have 9%, and then the banks that have 9 will need to borrow money from the banks that have too much. And so it was a mechanism that would sort of self-correct. Now, what would also happen is that if you didn't want to go to another bank, you could also go to the Federal Reserve's discount window and borrow money directly from the Federal Reserve. Now, the important aspect that John sort of glossed over is that, not to call you out, John, it's just, a lot of stuff going on here, is that with that 10% number, the banks could have went to the Federal Reserve and gotten, I think it was like at 1.25 or maybe 1.5 at the time. So they could have went directly to the Federal Reserve and borrowed money overnight for about 1.25, 1.5. But they chose not to, because then that was sort of like a scarlet letter or like a mark against you. Because if you had to go to the Federal Reserve, it meant that no other bank wanted to. They didn't think that you were solvent enough to keep your money overnight. And so what was more important is that a bank would rather pay 10% annualized to borrow money overnight than have to admit that they were in trouble. And then that was such a shot across the bow when we knew that was going on. Then it started going into, and if you back things up a year before that, so you were talking like October 4th, 2018, Jerome Powell said we're on autopilot, and every 3 months we're going to be raising rates by 1/4 point.
December too, like December 23rd, was it, when we had the massive crash in 20?
Well, that was when all the plunge protection team, all got together, and and Treasury secretaries and everybody started colluding. But you had things were in chaos to that, because initially they said, "Oh, we're going to start selling $50 billion of bonds a month," and I had an 8-minute podcast called "The Perfect Storm is Brewing" the May before that, saying there's no way you could do that, because right now the biggest, at the time, this is 2 years ago, the biggest seller of bonds were the Federal Reserve. So now the biggest buyer is now going to become the biggest seller. Like how's that going to work? Oh, and then
so you can't taper a Ponzi scheme. That's what.
And the second biggest buyer was the Chinese, and the third biggest buyer were the Japanese. Sometimes it rotates between those two. So, which is Japan's the most heavily indebted first world country in the world. So I'm like, wait a minute. So we're going to somehow sell $50 billion. I'm saying the United States is going to sell $50 billion of bonds to while our deficits are exploding, which now they're way bigger than anything we could have thought fathomable back then. And so that was really kind of all started with the Fed pretending that they could ever trim down their balance sheet. As soon as they got to $50 billion a month, which is what their target was, immediately collapsed, like immediately. And then interest rates started going up through the roof, and the Fed had to then renege and everything, and then say, okay, they're not going to sell any bonds. And then it got to the point where they were doing $1 trillion a day repo markets. So not only were they not selling $50 billion of bonds a month, now they're like buying like $50 billion a day. So, I mean, the fact that anybody still holds anything these guys say in any regard is just, incredible. And I've done some podcasts on the repo markets of the inner workings of that, but it gets pretty boring to, and it's all kind of some stuff I forgot. But anyways, I just wanted to point it out what John was saying, because the banks could have borrowed money from the Federal Reserve at 10, but they didn't want to.
Yeah, and as of right now, they continue. Back then, Tim, if you're an investor, you have to have what's called an exit strategy. If you hold an asset, how are you going to get rid of it if you want to liquidate it? That's a very important part. How are you going to do that? And then how physically you're going to be able to exit out of an investment. How I'm going to get my money back, example, or am I going to move it into another asset from there? Well, the Federal Reserve didn't really have an exit strategy. They were just thinking that somebody would, they thought, because they were the great empire of the United States, that they were going to be able to sell those bonds. Well, nobody really showed up. And, that's when the collapse started happening. And of course, the interest rates, they were able only to get them up to, what was it, 2.25, Tim? Like the Federal Reserve increased it to the actual, like, Fed rate. I think it was 2.25.
I don't even know if it was even that high, but I mean,
but it was really rapid though, and right away, it just it went south, in September 2017. And everything came falling apart. And after that, there's been a massive spike in, and it's not only the Federal Reserve in the United States. This has happened on a grand scale of every single central bank.
Canada is even worse. So.
Oh, Canada is insane. So the United States Federal Reserve went up how many percent from their old balance sheet?
Doubled basically.
Yeah, almost double. But here we went up 500%. Here in Canada.
We're talking about when we started about double, we meant since March. So I mean,
yeah.
if you talk about it since 2008, we went from $800 billion balance sheet to 7 point something today.
What do you got to remember about Canada though? We invented the hockey stick, so we should be the first one to make it happen anywhere. So it made sense that Canada went ahead and became the worst central bank in the world. Almost, well, they couldn't quite beat Venezuela, which is in its second hyperinflation right now. But it's you got to live up to it. But what was in Canada as well? There were repo interventions happening. I know in all the Scandinavian central banks there were repo interventions. So basically, all the banks everywhere in the world were having the same problems at the same time because everybody's interconnected. So it's very interesting what's happening there. And this is continuing to this day. You have on a daily basis anywhere from 5 till I would say, anywhere from $5 till $10 billion daily that the Federal Reserve is buying of assets, even though that they're, not, per se accumulating anything right now or doing anything. But what they're doing though is they're just increasing what they need to buy. Like they started with bonds, which is just government debt, and then now they went to what's called mortgage-backed securities, which is a derivative of course the real estate market. So basically, when you create a mortgage-backed security, underlying you have a loan here, and so you take that loan, and then you take 1,000 other loans, you put it over into a corporation called the special purpose vehicle. Now we have 1,000 in that. Now you create, let's say another, you layer maybe 10 or 15 of those inside of that new entity called the mortgage-backed security. And so they have this whole mismatch of assets. But what's interesting, Tim, right before, and Ricky, right before I actually came on the show here, I'm about to create something that's called the global derivatives market and understanding that. And for example, let me just give you a scope of how insane this market is and how much of these they're selling. So you have the actual underlying what's called gross market value, which is the actual value of underlying assets that these derivatives are backed against are 15.48 trillion on a global basis. Like we're talking about every single country in the world. Okay. Then you have on a global basis, there's as of first half of 2020, this is Bank of International Settlements number for those that are interested. It was 606.8 trillion. Now, if you take that in percentage terms, I'll quickly pull that up here so you could get like how insane amount of derivatives that are getting sold on top. That's 3,819% more derivatives that exists compared to the actual like assets that are underlying. So the banks have created another like kind of fractional scheme on top of real assets again, which they've done with. We could go into the gold market, we could go into so much else, but it's just a total scam and a Ponzi scheme that they created.
Alex, you want to jump in?
Well, yeah, this is the whole thing has dawned on me relatively recently that because when I was in hedge funds, we were anticipating one of these major banking institutions to fail imminently. So the candidates were Royal Bank of Scotland, Deutsche Bank especially, Societe Generale, HSBC, Italian banks, Intesa Sanpaolo, and so on. So many of them have been on the death watch, since 2016 at the very least, at the latest, 2016. And so nothing's happening. And then we get this COVID crisis. And then everything goes from bad to orders of magnitude worse. And the banks are still in business. They're still undead. And then it hit me, like I grew up in socialism. I grew up in former Yugoslavia. We had the one-party communist rule, and for as long as I can remember, I was born in 1970, and I guess since I started using money, we had inflation. I as a kid, I noticed it that you always needed more and more and more money to buy the same things. And the economy was very stagnant. So we definitely had stagflation full on from the second half of the 70s until the place fell apart in 1990 or 1991, right? So stagflation full on, never a banking failure, right? I think that one minor bank failed that I remember. One small town bank failed, I remember that. But we never had a bank run, we never had a banking crisis. And then, it finally hit me, the reason why we were expecting a major banking institution to fail is because we were under the mistaken impression that these banks are subject to the laws of the markets, where, if you have a business failure, that leads you to a business failure, right? You go bankrupt, you're done. Your depositors lose their money, they have FDIC to go back to, and then you get a bank run. And then if you have these mutual dependencies between banks, then you have multi-bank failure. I lived in Venezuela in 1993 when eight of the largest 16 banks in the country failed. It was a disaster. The economy instantly ground to a halt, and import stopped, export stopped, payments stopped. It was a complete disaster, and most people lost all their savings. And we never had that in socialism. We never had that in Yugoslavia. I checked that didn't happen in the Soviet Union. Why? Because simply when banks have bad debts, the government and the central bank simply print up what the corporate zombies need for their bad debts to be paid up, and they print up whatever money is needed to keep the banks in business. And then it hit me that we are in that stage. So there's been like a coup where central banks and governments no longer operate under market rules. They now operate under central planning rules. And what that means in practice is that rather than their banks and corporations failing, when I say there, you'll notice this term used more and more, the stakeholder capitalism, right? They talk about the stakeholder capitalism under globalization, right? It's these stakeholders, it's the people who control the monetary system and who control the largest corporations. Yeah, exactly, the Great Reset. And basically, rather than allowing their institutions to fail and to go bankrupt, they're going to bail them out permanently, and the price will be paid by everybody else because they're going to debase the currency. The currencies are going to go into hyperinflation eventually, and the price will be paid by everybody else. And so now that this process is in motion, they realize that they have to do a massive switcheroo so that when it all falls apart, they retain control of the system. And so there you get the big reset. You have the COVID-19. One thing Rick, you started this question with like what the intent is. I think there's no doubt that current programs are, the intention of the current measures is to destroy small and medium-sized businesses. That's not an accident. The same measures that you see in the United States, these small shops and bars and family-owned businesses going bust, it's the same thing they're doing in Croatia, the same thing they're doing in France, and the same thing they're doing in the UK. It's not because they think that somehow this will beat the virus. It's because the agenda is to destroy small and medium-sized entrepreneurship and leave the space wide open to the largest corporations.
Yeah, so it's kind of like corporate fascism mixed with it's like welfare for the the ultra wealthy again that we're back coming back up against here. You see this in Canada. What was it? The numbers that I looked at went from 870,000 small medium-sized businesses down to 710, which is a massive drop. Somewhere are getting predicted between 20 to 40% of all small and medium-sized businesses lost when this whole thing is over.
Yeah. US?
No, this is Canada. In Canada, yeah. So you're looking at Canada, and then you look at Norway as well. Like you're looking at somewhere already at about. I know a lot of business owners there. Some people say very similar numbers, 20 to 30% in Norway as well. Norway is kind of like we were heavily leaning towards socialism in Norway, but then we had to kind of backtrack a bit. So Norway is a weird economy because we used to be completely dependent on oil. Now with this whole Agenda 2030, they're trying to I guess we can't just sit on our butts, and spin on thumbs and get all this oil revenue. So now we need to do something. Norway's, for me, I think Norway, you were talking about Venezuela. Norway is what Venezuela was back in 1993 when it really started to unravel, and collapse from the oil, oil-rich nation. It was a prosperous nation, at one point. And then, I have Norway the same way, and now Norway is kind of starting to fall apart at the seams with the dependency on oil. Last crisis that we had in 2008, the oil fund that we have, which is massive, it's one of the biggest funds in the world, dropped 50%. Well, they were able to cover that up with oil royalty revenue from our offshore oil drilling over in Norway. But what is happening now when the collapse comes? The Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund owns 1% of all stocks in the world. Then you're looking at having a similar type of collapse. Let's say it dropped 50% again. Well, now oil is below 40, which is it's almost non-fungible. They can't even get revenue from it. Almost the oil companies in Norway. So how are you going to fix that? Well, you're going to have to print the money in between. That's what happened in Venezuela in 2008. They were relying on $130 a barrel that they would have in income. But then suddenly oil dropped, and the government had to print all that money in between to keep, the government up and running. And then so you had the collapse and the Bolivar pretty quick because the people saw the massive inflation. So what happens with any currency throughout history? This is every single currency that I looked at, over 200-300 of them. It takes suddenly one little breaking point And that breaking point is as simple as the trust of the people that uses the medium of exchange. When that trust is broken, it takes under a year. Every time. Nobody, like, no currency that I looked at was like heavy inflation for a longer period of time. It was just like, it went from like lower, like we're talking like developed countries, a lot of them. So they have like, 10%, some of them, which is crazy, but we were not too far after. But then suddenly it just takes off, because when people stop using the currency, the government can't use it to get tax revenue anymore. So you get a collapse because the government just got to print itself.
John, so on page 29 of this is Klaus Schwab's the Great Reset, and it says here, how did you go bankrupt? Bill asked. Two ways, Mike said, gradually and then suddenly. And so it's it's never really a problem until it always is. Page 33. Of course, page 33. The containment of the coronavirus pandemic will necessitate a global surveillance network capable of identifying new outbreaks as soon as they arise. And then I'm only a third of the way through this book right now, but on page 72, I think really the crux of this is at page 72, 73, and 74, and even 75. They just kind of lay it out right here. I mean, it's titled "The Fate of the U.S. Dollar" is it's a chapter here. And it's saying for decades, the U.S. has enjoyed the exorbitant privilege, and that's in quotes. And several times I've seen in the first 100 pages, they've referred to the U.S., basically the U.S. being the world reserve currency as an exorbitant privilege in quotes. And so that just shows you what they think of it. And they're right. It is a privilege of retaining the global currency reserve, a status that has long been a perk of imperial might and economic elixir. And that's also in quotes. The fact that so many countries and foreign institutions want to hold dollars as a store of value and as an instrument of exchange for trade has anchored its status as the global reserve currency. Skipping down here, for quite some time, some analysts and policymakers have been considering a possible and progressive end to the dominance of the dollar. They now think that the pandemic might be the catalyst that proves them right. So, I mean, it's almost like the Hegelian dialectic, where you create the problem, wait for the solution, and then, wait for the reaction and come in with your own solution. Their argument is twofold and relates to both sides of the trust issue. And basically, goes on to say, in their mind, unsustainable levels of the debt will eventually erode confidence in the U.S. dollar. And then it gets into U.S. defense spending and Medicaid and Medicare and Social Security and everything else. It's already over 100% of tax receipts. After all, the status of reserve currency cannot last longer than foreign confidence in the ability, that's what John's talking about, in the ability of the holder to honor his payments. On the other hand, managing the U.S. dollar sensibly for the rest of the world. And, then it keeps basically going on and saying that, hey, okay, here we go, page 74. As for a global virtual currency, there is none in sight yet, but there are attempts to launch a national digital currency that may even eventually dethrone the U.S. dollar supremacy. The most significant one took place in China at the end of April 2020. And again, this book was written in June 2020. So, I mean, this book was probably already ready to go. I mean, what's his name? Klaus Schwab was on the Bilderberg Steering Committee, for Christ's sakes. I mean, this guy was on the World Economic Forum.
Yeah, what's interesting, Tim, as well? Like, who he actually sent this book out to? Apparently, like the prime minister of, the premier of one of our provinces, Alberta, had gotten a copy directly from Carl Schwab. So he basically sent it out to all the world leaders, and I guess a lot of them have now bought in.
Yeah, no, exactly. So it's really, the page 72 through 75. Then, it even goes on to say a quote from Henry Kissinger on page 76. As Henry Kissinger observed, nations cohere and flourish on the belief that their institutions can foresee calamity and rest and its impact to restore stability. And so right now people are looking towards governments to have the answers. And then there's another chart in here, like somewhere like in the beginning, where it shows this whole like kind of web of what they're trying to, I hate the word, use the word solve, but I'm trying to find it right. Okay, here it is. So let me see if I can get that on there. But in the middle right there, you see is climate action climate action failure. And so, these are very high level, psychologists and people who are trying to war game this situation, because it's really many different facets of maybe 15, 20 different, conspiracies, all coming together and trying to, solve as many problems as they can. But what they're doing is they're creating these problems, waiting for the reactions. They've already had some, they probably even, I wouldn't be surprised if they already had this vaccine, sitting on the shelf somewhere, and then needed to then, create the perfect excuse. And, oh, look, sorry, we accidentally made everyone go sterile 15 years down the road, and oops, my bad. And, and I wouldn't be surprised if something like that ends up happening, but without even getting into the conspiratorial aspect of it, they want to have authoritarianism. They don't care if it comes through communism, fascism, all the isms basically boil down to a few people controlling everything.
They fund fascism, they fund communism, they fund, but it's all authoritarianism, or G. Griffin would like to say it's, it's individualism versus collectivism. And so we've got a bunch of collectives who are trying to get us into their way of doing things. And there's no better way to control people than, if you can, the power to, not the power to tax it, but yeah, I mean, we're getting to this end game where they're going to have a digital currency, but now they're trying to war game. How do we get everybody on the digital currency? How do we get everybody on the vaccine? Well, one way to do it is you ruin all the small businesses. You make millions of people, tens of millions of people in America unemployed, and all around the world unemployed, and people starving. And then they've already talked with the Brookings Institute of having one of the war games they want for this is they're going to give everybody $1,000, but you don't get the 1,000 right out of the gate. You get $200, and then once 80% of the country has been vaccinated, then they get the other $800. So then that way it will turn you against your neighbors and be like, the only reason we don't have this, extra $3,200 is because you're being selfish and won't get this, and it's going to try to turn people against each other. In Shenzhen, China, what they did about a month or two ago was they were issuing for a chance to win $30, you would install this government app on your phone, which is basically like the Chinese version of the digital currency. And, and they got, I think, 2 million people just in Shenzhen to sign up for it. And so they're trying to, gamify how they get everybody on this slave grid control system. And then I'm sure, vaccines tie into this, universal basic income ties into this. And eventually, like a frog boiling, where, the average person is going to be checkmated. And by the time they're already checkmated, it's already too late because they've already been checkmated. And so that's why, John and I, and I'm sure Alex have been, trying to warn people about this, and even you too, Ricky, and a lot of the other Union of the Unwanted guests, because I see from a financial aspect, everything that I've been basically, warning about for the last, dozen years is now being, just rammed forward way quicker than even, anyone probably could have even envisioned, even though, I was already had a pretty, more outlier guesses of where things were going, and it's even like speeding up even quicker than my timeline because they're going for broke. They realize that this is the perfect opportunity. Never let a good crisis go to waste, like Rahm Emanuel said. Now his brother Ezekiel Emanuel, who is in charge of death panels, is now going to be on Biden's transition team. And speaking of Biden, I mean, he's floated having the next Fed chair being Jerome Powell, which is the same guy that Donald Trump picked. And then now we've got the former, Fed chair, Janet Yellen, is now likely going to be the Treasury Secretary. And so it's just a big joke because the Fed was supposedly created to create this, independent central bank. And now you're getting people from the Fed now in the Treasury. Not that that hasn't happened in the past before with Geithner and I think maybe Paulson or these other, creatures that are in there. But anyways, I'll let somebody else, jump on some of that stuff because I've been rambling for a while. But it's just, but this is all, I mean, they write it in, not sure if we're allowed to swear, but they write it in their effing books. I mean, it's just,
Oh yeah, no.
you don't even have to take any crazy leaps. They just write it in their books.
Yeah.
And that's what frustrates me the most about this.
Yeah, exactly. Another great book to pick up is called The Redesign of the Global Financial Architecture, The Return of State Authority by a guy called Stuart P. McIntosh. This book was written about the 2008 crisis, how they took that crisis and then made a dictatorial power organization. It was there from before, but it was very small and non-significant. But they made something called the Financial Stability Forum, which was then ran by Mario Draghi over there at he was also at the ECB. He was a Goldman Sachs from Italy. And of course, that happened. So the transition happened from Draghi. He was there for a couple of years until then Mark Carney came from Bank of Canada over there and took it over. But the Financial Stability Board is basically
Also Goldman Sachs.
Yeah, it's funny. They're connected. They actually got seed funded by the Bank of International Settlements. And then, of course, what they started to do is they have about 20 central bankers from the top central banks in the world writing all the policy for all the central banks in the world. So Alex was talking about, how they're implementing this, central planning. Well, now they're doing it on a global scale, which they also have included accounting. They included the banking with the Bank of International Settlements. All the securities are under their control. And also, which one am I missing here? Accounting, security. Darn it, I'm missing one. But they basically, and what they liked about it, what he wrote in the book was that, instead of the IMF, where there's too many cooks in the kitchen, he said, 147 member states, there's too many people voting, and it's hard to get something through. He said that with the Financial Stability Board only having 20 people with the dictatorial power is a lot easier, than having all those cooks in the kitchen at the IMF. So there you go. Like they're basically, are taking the central planning onto a global level now, which they kind of like, they've been working on the infrastructure for many years. People wanted to do this for forever. But now they, managed to have the power with the 2008 crisis, the creation of the G20 group, right? And then like these central banks at the FSB basically push that into the G20 group, and then they implement, bail-in legislation came from there, where they basically could take money out of your bank at any given time. That was created by the Financial Stability Board, but many more programs that they actually created. So it's very interesting, how these bankers, and of course, the bankers over there in Europe are extremely corrupt. There's, Alex was mentioning the top banks there, and Deutsche Bank and, Societe Generale is some of the worst banks in Europe. Together with Intesa Sanpaolo and Unicredit in Italy, and then of course you got the oldest bank in the world that got bailed in. It was Monte Paschi di Siena in Italy as well. That got that was bailed in, I believe, which is the oldest living bank. It actually lived from the 1500s all the way till now. But it has been restructured in certain ways since then, but it still kept the name and the corporation from all the way back then. So, but again, back to...
Do you want to maybe talk about what a bail-in is versus a bail-out? Because a lot of people at home probably don't know what the bail-in
exactly.
is.
No, a bail-in, instead of bail-out, you just, take taxpayers' money and give it to the corporations, or what the banks call, central banks call quantitative easing. They're just print money and then give the banks fresh reserve, so at the central bank, and then blah blah all that. But with a bail-in, they basically created this, and this is funny. If you go and look it up online, it says that it was created back in 2002, 3 or something. Somebody came up with the term. No, it was not. There's a book that I have called the Exchange Stabilization Fund, Worcester Slush Fund, and that's another hidden, talking about currency manipulator. The U.S. is the biggest currency manipulator in the world, by the way. The exchange table in that book, actually, they talked about bail-in already in 1998. Was that book written? And they were talking about the same bail-ins as they implement now, where they basically take. So let's look at where they happened the first time. It was in Cyprus.
Cyprus.
Yeah, where they just took depositors' money that you thought was yours, right? And that's another fact check that people need to take. When you have your money in a bank, it's not yours at all. You lend it to the bank. So what happened was that the banks just did what it's called, you might hear another term, which these bozos use, sorry for my language, but they use something called recapitalization of the bank. That is the same as a bail-in. So basically what they do is, in order for the bank to try to survive, it needs to take all the depositors' money, and then recapitalize themselves with the deposits that they, are borrowing from the depositors. You got to remember, it's not really yours. And then, of course, they had, they also had deposit insurance schemes over in Cyprus, but they didn't work. When you have, two of the major banks fall, I believe it was Laiki Bank and Bank of Cyprus, if I'm not mistaken, that went south over there. And when those two went down, that's way more than any depositor insurance corporation could take. So there you go. Like they took it out. What was interesting for people that thought they were insured on money, so like this would be the FDIC in the United States, the CDIC in Canada, the financial claims scheme in Australia, and there's every country has these deposit insurance schemes. These insurance corporations, they have next to nothing of the money that you actually are there to protect you. So what happened in Cyprus was that people lost 9.9% of the people that were supposed to be insured. They lost, on an average, 9.9% of the deposits. The people above lost, it was 6.99, I believe, and then 9.99 for the people above 100,000, which is not in the insured category. Now there was a story of a lady, retiring. She wanted to go back home. She, lived her life, a beautiful place over in Cyprus. I've been there. And so she wanted to go home. She had sold her house. Her house, transaction was in the bank. Well, problem was that, you know, you had the collapse, and then suddenly 50% of that money was lost in that transaction because she was caught in the middle of a real estate transaction as that happened. So there's a lot of risk in this, but I don't think the bail-in is the best outcome that they're going to potentially try to do. I think there's a more sinister way to do this, and we can discuss that a little bit further into this.
Well, I'm not sure that bail-ins are even realistic at this point, because I think
exactly.
that the volume of bad debts and the losses that would have to be backstopped by the banks are probably larger than if they took most of the depositors' money. Maybe it wouldn't add up, and then what you find, you leave the economy with no purchasing power in it. So that, I think, would lead to a deflationary collapse, and
which they don't really want to, right?
No, they cannot want it, because that would implode their system. You know, like if they inflate it, if they inflate the debts away, then they give themselves time. They give themselves time to finagle Plan B. But one thing I wanted to get into, because, you know, I looked at a lot of these statements from people from the BIS, from the IMF, particularly Bank of International Settlements. What's his guy? The Mexican dude, the fat guy.
Are you talking about Agustin Carstens?
Agustin
from
Carstens.
Argentina? Yeah. He's from Argentina, by the way.
He's not Mexican? I thought he was Mexican.
No, he's Argentinian. Well, he might have a Mexican background, but he's officially from Argentina. Yeah.
Okay. Well, anyway, you know,
which makes sense, anyways.
It seems to me that they have jumped the gun, that they panicked, that this, you know, like as they started in September of last year, and I think that the repo crisis totally took them by surprise, and I think that they had no choice than to launch this whole project prematurely. And I know that from just maybe 2 years ago, the statements out of Carstens and Mark Carney, I think, no, Carstens, they were essentially unprepared for the global currency. They were unprepared for much of what they're talking about now in this great reset. And they don't have the technology. And so they have now panic launched somewhere in Basel, some Swiss company that's supposed to come up with these digital wallets, global digital currencies, and unroll this in time before the whole thing implodes, or that it be ready as the whole thing implodes. And I think they're not going to be ready. And the reason why I say this is because I know a little bit about developing these complex software systems, and they're very difficult to develop. People don't realize, you know, people talk about AI as though it's something that, you know, like some genius Elon Musk gnomes create and then it just works. It's not like that. It's extremely difficult to put together. It depends on a lot of moving parts. The operating systems have to be flawless. The databases have to be flawless. All the parts of the systems have to incredibly not the case, because we've had for decades, you know, like with the development of software, it's still okay because it's telling me the connection is bad. Anyway, so basically you've had these, with the development of all these new very sexy applications and platforms, you had complexity piled on top of complexity on top of more complexity, and it all kind of functions, but it doesn't function very well. And one of the very fascinating example is the U.S. Fighter F-35. An F-35 was launched It was a project launched in the 1990s. It was extremely important to the Pentagon. It was supposed to dominate the global skies for, I don't know, for the next few generations and make the United States absolute ruler of the skies worldwide. And the thing still doesn't function. It's still an extremely poorly executed. But like they don't have shortage of talent, they don't have shortage of funding, but they bungled it completely. And I have the impression that this whole program that the World Economic Forum, these globalists are trying to unroll, is going to increasingly be gumming up over these technological issues, because what Klaus Schwab is talking about, I thought, like I listened to some of his speeches about these scanners that are going to be installed in airports that are going to be able to read your thoughts before allowing you to board an airplane to see if you're, I don't know, a terrorist or whatever. I thought either he's an idiot or they're just it's a red cloth, bullfighters red cloth to impress us with the technologies that are coming our way. But believe me, they're not. This is never going to happen. Like driverless cars, it's never going to happen. Never. Like we can take a bet today, it's never going to happen. And so I think that they're gonna have to make a detour, and I suspect that the detour is going to be into war, because I think that a major war would give them an added emergency, added way to traumatize populations and disorient everybody, to give themselves more leeway and more power to put all these things together, and maybe to get rid of a good chunk of population. Anyway, this a little bit all over the place, but I think that the agenda is a little bit all over the place. So it's not easy to read it, except that we're in it and they're going to create a lot of damage before it all collapses.
Yeah, I think a lot of the damage is intentional. So if you take a look at Obama's, his professors out of Columbia were Cloward and Piven, and they had a whole, and a lot of people are probably familiar with this, that whole strategy where you overwhelm the welfare system, bankrupt the country, and then rebuild the country in the image you want to. So you create the crisis in order to usher in the redesigned civilization or community that you're trying to get. John was talking a lot about balance, and it was either 2013 or 2014. At the time, the vice chair of the Fed was Stanley Fischer, who was also the former Bank of Israel chairman and Israeli citizen. That was, for whatever reason, now the head of, not because he's Israeli or not making anti-Jewish thing, but anti-Semitic. But I don't think anybody first off, I don't think the central bank should even exist. But you certainly shouldn't be having foreigners running your central bank. I think that is one of the craziest aspects of anything. And he actually said in a speech, very hard to find now, I think it was in Stockholm, Sweden, so very fitting it was in Stockholm, so the Stockholm syndrome going on now, but it said something along the lines of, we will issue bail-inable long-term debt, so then that way, basically that the banks can just help recapitalize themselves. But I do agree with Alex that I think we're well past the point of balance, because the money is debt. And so what you have to understand is that since the money is backed by treasury bills, bonds, and note, which are debt, even from day one, you are always going to be in a situation where there's more debt than there is quote unquote money, which isn't really money. It's currency. It's a whole other subject. But and I know that that we know this on this call, but once you understand the fact that you can take all the money in the world and you cannot pay off the debt because the money is the debt, and then everything would then implode in a deflationary collapse. And so the powers that be cannot have deflation happen, because if you have asset prices going down, then the whole debt carousel implodes, and there's no way that there's not enough money out there in the world to take from people. And so it's much easier to have the central banks printed up. And, kind of going along with what Alex was saying in terms of, these systems being complex. I mean, you've got now the Office of Comptroller Currency being headed by Brian Brooks, who was a former chief legal advisor at Coinbase, and he's been there since actually April 1st. So, there's jokes on all of us. And what they're going to do with that is if you take a look at the first bailout bill by Maxine Waters, they actually called for a digital dollar, that the $1,200 payment would be paid in a digital dollar. And then they realized, I think that was just like a trial balloon. They never, intended to actually go through with that. And so now I think the reason why there's not been another, stimulus is I think the next stimulus might be rolled out and tied into a vaccine of, hey, if you want your $1,800 or whatever, number they're going to trot out, you've got to get your vaccine. Or maybe that's eventually down the line. Maybe that's the third one or the fourth one they do in terms of bailouts. But I do see that, coming down the pipeline in terms of, I will take you up on the driverless car bet. I mean, I think that there is going to be driverless cars, and I think eventually they're going to, but I also think that there's going to be nefarious sides to that too, of eventually they're going to say, they're going to use private industry. A lot of the stuff they'll use private industry to then usher it in and say, oh, well, you aren't going driverless, so now your car insurance rates are going to be jacked up because it's safer. But then obviously there's concerns where if everything's driverless, well then if we're a bunch of dissenters and they just decide, oh, hey, Tim and Ricky and John and Alex, we're just going to drive you off the cliff because we don't like all the stuff that you guys have been saying, exposing our agenda. And so I mean that's that is.
Well, they're going to deliver you straight to the police station for some re-education or enhanced interrogation.
Yeah, and then maybe that's why the Cybertruck, maybe it's going to be bulletproof, so we can't even fucking shoot our way out of there. We can't, get out. We can't unless we got one of those, one of those steel balls that I guess they were throwing at it and hit it with a sledgehammer beforehand. And so who knows? But with everything, it's just amazing how fast that they're going. And in terms of war, I really thought that in 2013, at 14, my analysis of this was that we were going to try to get into a war with Russia. And it's funny because I was telling an intern this, and the very next day was when that whole Malaysian Airlines somehow Russian jet got shot down. And so I thought that the game plan was to have Hillary get in there, have a war with Russia, then blame the economic collapse on, oh, if it wasn't for the damn Russians, everything would have been fine. But then now I think Trump sort of threw like a curveball into the system. And I know some people might disagree with that or not. I'm not saying that he's necessarily a good guy. I don't think the system wanted him in there, but they've used him to ramp up and use him as the perfect fall guy for all of this. But then eventually, the currency wars, John was mentioning how we're the biggest currency manipulator in the US. And that's why I always hated when Trump was accusing China of manipulating the currency. I'm like, what the hell do you think the Federal Reserve's job is? What do you think the plunge protection team is doing?
The exchange stabilization fund.
Yeah, the exchange.
Actually, if you go and look at that fund, it says it's to keep the U.S. Dollar exchange rates stable.
Yeah, and then getting back to the military-industrial complex, I was talking with a guy actually at Jekyll Island Club where the Federal Reserve was founded. And actually, it wasn't at the Red Pill. I was there at the Red Pill event, but a guy who wasn't even there. So in case Deep State's listening to this, and it was a guy from the military-industrial complex who was telling me, he goes, one of the reasons why we have all these big boondoggle contracts is because now he was inside the system and he's was giving his analysis of it to me, not knowing probably all the stuff that I talk about with you guys and stuff. But he was telling me, he goes, well, what we need is, what the powers that be are worried that if we get into a war that we're not going to have all the factories up and running. We're not going to have all these companies that, quote unquote, help us out. I'm not saying I agree with this. I'm just saying what his analysis was. And that by having all these BS contracts of like the F-35, it keeps the military industrial complex fed and happy and all these workers and all the machine going. So that way, if there is a war, the machine's already there. However, I'm sure all of us agree that eventually the machine gets so big that the machine becomes the thing that actually causes your destruction because we don't have the, financial wherewithal, just like every other empire, to pay, all these soldiers and all these, people in the cogs. Eventually there's more people, in the cart than are pulling the cart. And I think the military industrial complex is at a certain point making the U.S. a lot less safe, and it's less safe than it is making us safe because we're looking for problems around the world. We're funding all these, F-35 type projects, and China goes and steals the information anyways and probably makes it better. But
it's government spending as a part of GDP. If you look at all the southern states in Europe that collapsed, all of them were over 50%. It's like seems to be a dead zone. I have, like we were talking about, like potential outcomes of this, and I have two more outcomes that I potentially see. And one is leaning into war. Both of them are kind of leaning in towards the World Economic Forum's kind of view on what they want to see. The first one is that we'll get a collapse, massive banking collapse. All the debt will, none of us going to be able to pay back the debts that we have. I'm not talking to us especially, but like a lot of people out there has so much debt that, just a loss in job or whatever is going to just wipe them out right away. People are going to be desperate. So let's say that also they had money in their bank, some people, which they do. Suddenly you have a collapse. The banks go under, they collapse, they're done. What I've heard, and this is actually from a guy called Simon Dixon. I met him down in Acapulco, Mexico, at the Anarchapulco conference. And what he was saying is that, well, that could happen, that you have all the whole banking system collapses. But then the government comes with their CBDC, their central bank digital currency. This was 2 years ago, by the way, so not recent. And he said that, potentially what they could do is they could actually just say that if you come over here to our new central bank digital currency and the wallet with the, that you will have with the central bank, it might look like you have it directly with your bank, but we're gonna have it directly connected to the central bank itself. And then if you come over, let's say you had 11, 20,000 or something over here that you lost. Well, if you come over here, we're going to give you everything back. But now you're on the control grid. So that's one of them. That's one of my my thoughts that could happen. The second one is, of course, we were talking about who's going to bail out who in the next collapse. Like, look at the central banks, their massive balance sheets. Well, you could have the James Rickards kind of thing that he's been pushing all along is, the IMF coming out and issuing special drawing rights, which is a basket of currencies. It's so funny. You got the International Monetary Fund, the special drawing right. It sounds nothing like a central bank or a currency, but that's what they are. And so it's like the IMF is the global the central bank. The SDR is the currency, which is a basket of value of the yen, the renminbi, the euro, and the US dollar. And so that basket is, and what they could do is they issue these every now and then to settle trade and so on forth and back. And it's actually the Exchange Stabilization Fund in the United States that actually holds the special drawing rights, by the way, which is controlled by the Undersecretary of the Treasury of the United States. So
and the International Monetary Fund actually acts like a bank, and the World Bank actually acts like a fund, and the Federal Reserve isn't federal and doesn't reserve anything. And then if you take a look at the Libra, and then take a look at the Libra, and actually I had guessed this on video the day before the white paper was announced that the Libra would be very close composition to the special drawing right. Was a little walk and talk video
right
the day before they issued the white paper. I'm like, I bet that they're going to try to model it after the SDR, almost identical.
Yeah, and what did Mark Carney say, right? I think that is a potential outcome. So they could issue that new currency, then buy up the toxic assets from the central bank, just what they did to the banks, and then they will hold them in a global, balance sheet at the IMF. So that is a potential outcome as well. That's two of the different other outcomes that I could see that they could concoct, out of this craziness. But it doesn't say that it will happen, but it's a potential outcome from their crazy ideas.
So do you guys think getting rid of money, physical money, is one of those agendas that are being pushed, or is there, and what would be the purpose of that?
Well, the short answer is yes, and the purpose of that is, if you want to, because right now we're in a situation where, and I hate using we, but we're in such a situation where the amount of debt just in the U.S. debt, I forgot if it's 26 or 27 trillion, but then that number doesn't even include Medicare, which is a bigger unfunded obligation than Social Security. It doesn't include, if you start tacking on all the unfunded obligations, I mean, we're probably well over $200 trillion of obligations that are out there. So you start getting a real interest rate of 5% or something, and all of a sudden now the amount of debt that if you owe somebody $1 million and you have 5% interest, okay, that's $50,000 a year. You have 0% interest, and all of a sudden you don't owe them anything, or you have negative interest rates, and then now they owe you money for borrowing money. And it's just, and so eventually they want to get everybody socially engineered, where once they have us by the what, then all of a sudden it's okay, well, you didn't get your vaccine, and so we're going to chart, maybe you get a higher negative interest rate, or we're going to socially engineer where you don't get your, I mean, Kamala Harris actually I was calling her Kamala because I'm not going to mispronounce her name, but she was talking about 5-6 months ago having a $10,000 per month. It's actually a bill that I think she authored in the Senate, a $10,000 per month universal basic income for anyone that made less than $120,000 a year. Now, if you were making, which is most people, so why the hell would anybody work if for most people they're making less than that? And so it's all about control. And so if you can control the money, you can control the people, which is why, you know, Mayor Nathan Rothschild said, I care not who makes the laws. I care about who controls the money, and I control the money, or something like that. I mean, paraphrase. I think, you know, Rockefeller had something similar. And actually, I might already be wrong over here on my bet that I made with Alex. I'm looking at Zero Hedge, and it says Uber takes $3 billion markdown on self-driving division. Damn it. No. And they sold it to, so I guess they sold it to Amazon already. But yeah, it's all about control, because if you can, if you can, you know, start taking money from people's bank accounts and saying, hey, listen, you know, there's going to be this negative 2% a year drain, or then maybe it keeps going higher, then you're going to force people into the stock market, force people into different financial assets.
Well, they're forcing velocity, right, Tim? Because like velocity of money, which is how fast it exchanges hands in the economy, it's at a record low in the United States. It's like a massive, like if you go and look at the chart, it's just like a massive drop off.
Which is why there's not massive like inflation by how they measure it, is because of that velocity. Okay.
Just one thing about the velocity is that, you know, like we have to take into account is that it automatically goes down when you pump in, you know, like the Federal Reserve pumped in some, like, I don't know, $3 trillion into money supply very rapidly, you know, like the rate went up 25%, which never even happened even during the 1970s when we had inflation. And basically what happens when you dump so much money into the economy, people do not immediately change their spending habits. And it's for that reason that velocity almost, you know, like as money supply goes up, the immediate effect is that the velocity of money collapses. But as people start gradually changing their habits, or as somebody mentioned, the confidence in the currency crashes, then the velocity picks back up, you know. So it's
because people have to spend it, right, or else they're gonna lose the value of it. So they're desperate about, you know, I want to get something for that currency, or else if I wait a little bit longer, you know, now it's gonna be not worth it anymore. I think that's what's like where we're heading down here in Canada, Alex, because we have massive saving rates, because we had mass amounts of programs that shoved a whole bunch of money into the economy. So like, but that's also the Weimar Republic had, you know, massive amounts of saving happening while velocity was slowing down because nobody was putting the money into the economy. So again, you know, a lot of the, and a lot of the money that was also put into the economy, we got to remember that just sits stagnant on the central bank's actual accounts that the banks have there. You know, most of the money. You know, I was looking at it was passed out, and I think I looked at it, was like under 1% that was given to the people in the United States at the time. I don't know the exact numbers, but it so like all that money, you know, went directly to bail out the banking system and the big corporations through the like they had what's called PMCCF and CMCCF, which was basically they went in there, they created, remember I was mentioning those special purpose vehicles, they created those corporations, and then they went in and bought up bad assets and also bad ETF, exchange traded funds, which is just, you know, contracts that you could trade that simulates something, stock or whatever it is. So they actually did that with a lot of corporations as well. On top of everything, that was actually done with through the Exchange Stabilization Fund, which is actually directly the U.S. taxpayer. So they were actually bailing out ETFs with U.S. taxpayers' money. Meanwhile, everybody's saying that, oh, it's the Fed that's doing it. Well, it's actually the Exchange Stabilization Fund, which is then, you know, a sub control over the Undersecretary of Treasury in the United States. Yeah. Well, yeah, BlackRock, this is the most insane part of it. BlackRock was, you know, supposed to be the dealer that actually sold and bought, you know, the assets for the Federal Reserve under those two programs. And they actually got paid fees depending on how much, you know, money they were able to sell. Buy of these resources. The problem is they bought from themselves as well.
Like so they had their own. They had their own junk bond fund.
Fascism at its peak. Yeah.
I mean, they had their own junk bond fund that they got to unload their own junk to the Federal Reserve and get paid a commission while getting their assets, you know, basically booked, you know, 100 cents on the dollar. And that was a thing that I had mentioned at Anarchapulco this year when I talked. I uploaded it the day before the S&P 500, well, the first high back in February, like February 20th, I think was the high, February 19th. I uploaded the video. And in the video, I said, listen, every time you have you have one of these crises, about about a third of the investment grade bonds, the triple B bonds, get downgraded to junk status. And so that would, mean that you have, hundreds of billions of dollars, like 600, 800 billion, I forgot the exact amount, that would get downgraded to junk. Then what's different this time versus 2008 is that now the proliferance of ETFs, exchange funds that are, let's say, investment grade bond funds, or whether mutual funds or ETFs, their perspectives is they have to invest in investment grade bonds. And now if you're not one, they would have to sell. And then that forced selling would then create more forced selling. It would create an avalanche. And I had said this February 19th, like literally right before, around the corner, and that the Fed would have to come in and start buying up corporate bonds. And then they even blew away my expectations of what they would end up doing. And it was just, absolutely insane. But at the end of the day, and Alex was talking about, back in the 70s, unlike the 70s, we were able to raise rates up to, 18, 19, 20%. I mean, I wasn't alive back then, but now there's no way in hell that they could even raise rates ever again. I mean, they might have some token raises.
They would have to, though, Tim.
Well, what I'm saying is the whole thing is,
yeah.
The whole thing is going to end up collapsing, because there's really only three things the Fed can try to save. And I'll use, save under, in case people are listening to the podcast version of this in air quotes here, but they can save either the stock market, the dollar, or the bond market. And I guess with the bond market, it depends, who they're saving it for, the borrowers or the creditors. And so with this time, it's by lowering the, they're initially trying to save the bond market, because with the interest rates rising back in 2018, when they were trying to sell $50 billion of bonds a month, they had to stop all those programs to quote unquote save the bond market from the borrowers. Then and then that also then quote unquote helps the stock market. But eventually, by doing all those things, you're eventually going to destroy the dollar. So you can't save all three things. And so eventually they're going to end up, messing up all three of those things, and end up getting nothing, and then probably getting a war to then, come in as the excuse to then re-engineer everything. And then it was everything that's so far in the first 100 pages of this great reset they're going to try to implement, because they're going for broke this time. They realize that right now they have everybody exactly where they want them. They're scared broke. I mean, Klaus Schwab said that in the future you'll own nothing and you'll be happy, or something like John probably knows the exact quote. You'll own nothing and you'll be constantly surveilled and you'll love it, or something, and you'll be happy. It was something like this. And so these people are psychopaths. They have an agenda, and they're using the fact that people are good-willed and good-natured in general and don't think about this type of stuff, that the average person would never think that this would exist. But a lot of people are religious, but then they don't believe. They believe in God, but then they don't realize that there could be a devil. And if there was a devil, what would he try to be doing? Every single thing. That's basically what they're trying to do right now. If you were a bad guy, that's what you do. You'd come in as a good guy, try to fool everybody. Oh, I'm just some nerd that created a company in my mom's basement. It definitely wasn't IBM or the CIA or DARPA giving me all this seed money, or InQtel. I just came up with it on myself, and I just happen to give away all my money to all these organizations that are basically hell-bent on eugenics. And aren't we just such a good guy? I mean, I'm sure you guys can think of some people who I'm talking about right now, and it's it's not by accident where these people got to.
No, exactly. It's these guys are notorious. I just got to read this because of those that don't believe that what Tim was mentioning about BlackRock. This is actually from the contract that they made, the IMA BlackRock FMA, and you could find it under the New York Fed website if you dig deep enough. But I sent the link to you, Ricky, so you could share it if people want to see it. But this says, the FRBNY, which is the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, will pay to manager each calendar quarter as a full compensation for services rendered a management fee based upon the average quarterly notional value of the commercial mortgage-backed securities in the portfolio based on the records of the custodian, calculated monthly as of the last day of each month and payable quarterly at the end of such calendar quarter. The quarterly fee rate will be equal to 2 basis points annualized on the first 20 billion in AUM of the portfolio. 1.25 basis points annualized on the increment of AUM of the portfolio greater than 20 billion up to 50 billion, and 0 basis points annualized for incremental AUM of the portfolio greater than 50 billion and up. for purposes of this Exhibit D, AUM shall mean the current face amount of the commercial mortgage-backed security includes unsettled trades and TBAs, and not to be reduced by unsettled current face sold as a part of dollar roll transactions. So that they basically have that's a part of the contract. If you read, it's like 36 pages. But that's what they've set up. It's a great deal. You get to sell your trash for cash, basically at the Federal Reserve. And you make money on it. Larry Fink is going to be very happy, when he get rid of his toxic derivatives that he has on his balance sheet, and he gets paid for it, by the Federal Reserve itself. So it's a great gig. If you get to get rid of, okay, I have some debt that I really would like to get rid of. Wouldn't it be great to actually get paid for getting rid of your debt? Everybody would do that, and that's exactly what is happening with the BlackRock setup here and others that are dealing this trash for cash, basically over in the United States. And so there's, these guys are, notorious, basically mafia and crime lords that are running the show. You have the biggest banks in the world today. They have litigation funds that they've set up to, if they ever break the law, you could pay off the politicians with, X amount of money from those litigation funds. If you, let's say like you had the Wells Fargo, for example, having schemes of creating, 5-6 million fake bank accounts, then, making recurring revenue on those fake bank accounts. And then on top of that, you had them coming out with fake auto insurance as well. Suddenly people have auto insurance that have gotten a loan, which they didn't ask for. But so those things they had to pay for at the end, they made a lot more money than they had to pay back for it. But it's a good bribe to the politicians to, give a little slap on the wrist, so the peasants are happy with, that the bankers are taken care of. But then again, they just continue to continue with the same activity right after they pay their fine in certain other different ways. There's so many schemes going on in manipulation. The massive what's called the LIBOR scandal back, the London whale it was called, where they were basically manipulating all interest rates in the world. And actually now they're doing a transition from the whole IBOR, which is an interest rate that are used for interbank, what is it, something rate?
The London interbank offering rate.
Offering rate, yeah, sorry. So like they have, there's IBORs in every country almost, but now they're transitioning over to SOFR or measures that are set by the central bank instead, Tim. Instead of because this was just a rate that they call up all I think like 20 banks. It's like, what would you offer as an interest rate right now? And so that's how they set the interest rate for every single, credit card, car loan, house, mortgage, and so on around the world. And they were manipulating that. So they were manipulating everybody's mortgages, everything.
Well, one of the guy who wrote the software behind some of that stuff that was trying to investigate that was actually the Sandy Hook killers. Was it not Sandy Hook? It was the Colorado shooter who looked like the McDonald's guy or something. That James Laughlin or something. I forgot the guy's.
Okay.
Garrett.
Yeah, I live in Sandy Hook, so I thought you were talking about me.
No, we're not talking. No, I think it was the Colorado movie shooter. His dad was tied into some of this stuff. Anyways, yeah, no, it's all rigged. Even like the gold rigging, it's literally done by at one of the floors of like the Rothschilds. I mean, it's just so obvious.
Oh, the LBMA, yeah, it was actually done in the Rothschilds' office until late. Like that was taken away, but yeah, it's like that's pretty insane. Like it was done in the Rothschilds' office. That's how they set the gold, the LBMA, like the actual gold rate. So yeah, these banksters are just been like throughout history. Every single time they come up with a scheme, they create new measures and so on to dupe the public into believing in these schemes. That there's hundreds upon hundreds. The Chinese were the first ones to come out with it in 2024 with the Sung Dynasty. They initially had a paper currency that they printed, but they backed it with 30% of copper coinage. then they, over time, they started to create credit, and then they started to increase the wealth of people. It was called the Great Chinese Miracle, basically, economic miracle. And what happened was that, they had a booming economy, and it was created upon a debt bubble. And then at the rare end of it, when everybody was indebted, well, there was nobody else to get into more debt. We had the problem with Tim was trying to allude to, where you create $100, then like I go and borrow that to you, Ricky, and then I want the interest on that. But the problem is it's the only $100 in existence. So I want interest. Well, how are we going to get that interest paid back to me? Well, you're going to have to go and borrow some more money from me, and I charge you interest on that. So you can see, like, always there's an overlaying extra of interest on all the debt in the world. So you could pay all the debt in the world and he would still owe interest. And so that's where you see the Ponzi scheme.
Well, that's why movies like James Corbett's The Fed, the Federal Reserve Century of Enslavement documentary was so important. And so was, I know James isn't a huge fan of the Zeitgeist movies, and we've talked about it in the past.
Yeah, no, I got, I was all into them to start with, and then I kind of like changed my mind quite a bit.
I think
around
the second one, it simplifies it for people, where they can kind of see how how money is made out of nowhere. And I think James's documentary is super important too, because I think debt is a great way to enslave people. It's a great, I mean, you put these kids through college, or you tell them to go to college, they come out, oh, you get this high paying job, but you're already in debt, and which means you have less freedom, you have less ability to maybe go pursue a different career or some other life pursuit. And so you basically grab people by the balls. Yeah. Yep. John.
Yeah, and you have, like, basically you have the like, it was government interventions that created that whole bubble with the tuitions that went through the roof, because they started to subsidize guaranteed the loans.
Yeah.
And so they actually created a massive bubble, because now they were like, well, heck, we're going to charge a lot more for this now. You said the universities and the colleges.
Well, and it's the one debt that doesn't go away. I mean, you file a bankruptcy, you always owe that money.
Insane, yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, it's obviously a racket. I mean, the other thing too is the fact that these colleges, they spend all this money just making it look prettier, and none of it is really spent to further the children's education. We do construction, from time to time we work at UMass or some local college, Williams College, or in the Berkshires or whatnot. And it's amazing the money they spend on, like, landscape, on trees, on, some type of ridiculous, architectural thing that makes the campus look nice. So when you go there with your kids and you're like, wow, this is overwhelming, this is gorgeous. But
or bureaucracy, or like, oh, we need to have this gender studies class, or we need to have this diversity thing. I remember.
Then they're all actually here. They're like all striking all the time because they don't get paid enough money. The professors and so on.
Yeah, the gender studies thing. I mean, that's a whole podcast among itself.
And I've seen I actually worked at like putting in surveillance cameras at a I do that for a living together with a whole bunch of other stuff in low voltage, and we did that, and they have like safe spaces everywhere and gender neutral bathrooms. That's what we have here at our local university.
Well, here, I'm going to be a professor at a college, and if you pee standing up, you're a boy. If you pee sitting down, you're a girl. How about that? Everybody gets an A.
Well, it's really nice.
What about the other 25?
Hey, come on! I actually like the other bathroom. I was in it. They have like, it's a lot nicer setup. It's like you feel like you go into a hotel bathroom compared to the stalls that reeks.
Are you referring to the third bathroom?
The transgender, like the what is it? No, what did they call them again now? Gender neutral bathrooms. Yeah.
Yeah, it's well, the thing with me is, and I've said this, I think I was talking to like Whitney Webb and Ryan from The Last American Vagabond when I had them on. I remember, and they both have tattoos, and I'm like, how many people at 18 get a tattoo then regret it forever? Like, every time you see somebody with a stupid tattoo, it's always like, yeah, I got it when I was a teenager. Yeah, I got it when I turned 18. Like, my point is, like, when we're 18, we shouldn't be making lifelong decisions. So when you're giving hormone replacements to children and you're telling them that they can decide these things, like when it could easily be just a trend, or just I remember when like one of my favorite cars was like a Corvette growing up, and I remember like I'm like, I want to own a Corvette, and then I bought a '01 Z06 Vet, and I loved it. And I remember for like a week, I'm like, I'm gonna go get a Corvette tattoo. And I'm like, I love this car. It brought me such happiness. I'm like, I'm so proud of owning a Corvette. This is the best thing ever. And I was young. I was like the kid with the Corvette. That's everybody knew me as the kid with the Corvette when I would go out. And I'm like, imagine how fucking I would look like a hillbilly right now with a Corvette tattoo, chewing tobacco, banging my sister. It's like, who has a Corvette? But it's like for a split second, I could have made a poor decision if I was intoxicated enough. It's just one of those things where like.
Now we just lost all of our Corvette tattoo listeners.
I think they probably tuned out a long time ago.
Yeah.
Well, you could also be like Janet Yellen and say that we will never get a recession in our lifetime. You know what's really
And now
funny,
she's
though?
gonna be the Fed. Now she's gonna be the new Treasury Secretary. And just yesterday, I had my girls here, and one of them like put on like a little like a hairband thing, and then she goes, "Oh no, Daddy, that's only for girls. Only girls do that." And I'm thinking, yes, you're right. Only girls should be doing that. So a little small. Like, thank you for my almost 4-year-old that already understands that.
What's hilarious though, you gotta excuse her because she had a urinary tract infection at the same time, so she could have been a little bit delusional. Let's make the benefit of the doubt, hopefully.
Are we talking about Janet Yellen or?
Yeah, that was Janet Yellen. It actually came out at the same time. I'm not even kidding. Like it was right there. Like, me and Josh were making fun of it back. Like we made a video on it.
Yeah, I have a 4-year-old girl, and and I have a 5-year-old boy. They are just different creatures. They're not the same boys and girls. They're just.
And I've got a 5-year-old girl too. That's
You're outnumbered. You're outnumbered, Tim. Yeah.
Grew up in a house of all guys with a single parent dad, and now I've got all girls. So
that's your punishment, Tim.
Karma.
The player's curse. No.
So do you think universal basic income is so? This is okay. So for people who are listening who don't know what I was planning on, and Professor Richard Wolfs, he's been on the show before, and I was planning on getting him on, give a little different perspective. I figured it would provoke some interesting conversations. But so this idea of like, okay, so during the lockdown, we had a lot of people believe that money is the motive for many people. Like, you give everybody money, they're just not going to work, and they're not going to do anything productive, right? And so to be devil's advocate, I truly believe that most great thinkers, artists, I mean, they're not motivated by money. I think they're motivated by their work. And then in many cases, money comes afterwards. I mean, look at Joe Rogan, became the biggest podcast ever by not giving a fuck about money. I mean, he was told early in his career. I mean, this is just a modern day example. I mean, obviously you can go back to like Nikola Tesla and all, great inventors or whatnot. But, Joe Rogan, he was told, don't do 3-hour shows. Nobody's ever going to listen to it. All these things that they told him not to do, don't swear, it's not going to be friendly to everybody who's listening. And some people do listen to these shows in the background with their families. I mean, I know, because every time I have James Corbett on, I get some angry fans of his saying, stop swearing. I listen to James Corbett in the background with my family. But so my point is, I think the school system, and this is where it all kind of connects and is linked together. And I guess, Alex, we'll get, I'll give you time to chew, but I'll get your take on all this and what you think, and the rest of you guys. But I think some of the problems that we have with people having to be motivated by money is the dumbing down of our school system. It dumbs people down, where we're told don't pursue anything of passion or anything that is fun. It's like, pursue things that make you financially, more money. And so it's not, and there's been studies and which kind of proves this point, where I remember when I had Hunter Motz on the show, he wrote the Straight A Conspiracy, and he used to do a show with Brian Callen called Mixed Mental Arts. But Hunter Motz, he was talking about how when you ask kids, I don't know if it was kindergartners, first graders, whatever, like, how many of you guys are creative? And like, everybody raises their hand. And as you get older and older with the kids, less and less kids raise their hand. And it's true. And as a musician, you know, I used to write a lot of music and whatnot. I'd always get friends of mine who were like, "Oh, I could never do that. I could never just write something. I could never, you know, come up with a melody or a song or whatever." And I would always tell them, like, listen, like, we're all creative. I mean, as kids, we're playing with blocks, we're painting, we're coloring, we're coming up with games to play with our friends. And then as time goes by, we say, hey, those things are a waste of time. Tone it down, focus on engineering or problem, or not problem solving, actually regurgitating information. And then what happens is we create a society where people don't have critical thinking skills, they don't have imagination, they don't have any of these things. So you're stuck in this system where basically, you know, your way of survival is just regurgitating information and not doing anything that you really enjoy. So you're not really passionate about what you do. So you need that money motive to pursue those things. Where if we didn't have the school system that we have today, I'm curious to know your guys' opinion. Could we have a world where even if you did have universal basic income for like the necessities, would people still pursue things that they enjoy? And I think they would, because you look at, like I said, a lot of people, I do this podcast and for a long time at a loss. Just recently, you know, I created a Patreon page and now, you know, it pays the bandwidth and all that stuff, but it wasn't ever a motive. I didn't care, you know, and in many cases, my favorite musicians, my favorite artists, my favorite poets, my favorite whoever inventors, you know, you look at their story, money was never a motive. It was always just something that came afterwards, or fame came afterwards, you know, because with Nikola Tesla, I mean, money never really came, but at least, you know, he did something important, and because he was motivated by his work. Do you think that, and you saw it during the lockdown, that people are like, oh, we just need to get back to work. We just need to get back to work. It's not, in some cases, I don't think it's because they actually enjoyed their job. I think people need purpose. I think the idea of having money and just staying at home sounds good to some, like, you know, the small portion of the population that have been so dumbed down that seems great. But even them that would have to find some type of mindless entertainment or something to do, it would get old. But I think in many cases, the majority of the population could only do that for a little bit of time. Like, the idea of a vacation always sounds great, right? And then you go on one of those vacations that are like 1 or 2 days too long, and you're like, fuck, man, I'm just relaxing. I need to get back to doing something productive. Like, what the fuck am I doing? I didn't earn this, you know. And I've always been like that, where I'm like, I need to earn my glass of wine at the end of the night. I need to earn my sitting down and relaxing. I need to feel like I did something productive. So what's your guys' thought on this? Do you think, like, this idea of, like, you know, because some of the argument is you give everybody money and nobody's going to do jack shit. How much of that do you think is true? And then how much of it, if you do think is true, is because of the school system we've created that really does dumb people down and really tells them not to pursue things that they enjoy? And if we had a school system that, or no school system, or whatever system we had, if we had a system that said, hey, you like this, pursue it. You like that, pursue that, chase it. And then we would have a whole different, you know, we wouldn't have these issues. Does any of that make sense?
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah, it totally makes sense. Sorry, Alex, you can go first.
okay. Well, basically, I entirely agree with what you said, Ricky. First of all, I strongly believe that people are not necessarily motivated by money. They are to an extent, but it's not at the core of what moves us, actually. I think that people, especially men, maybe in a different way than women, need a purpose in life. And I know that I've been in life situations where I didn't have to do a whole lot, and then I took maybe, you know, a few weeks of doing exactly nothing, and honestly, I would get physically sick, like literally physically sick, and like in a strange rapid succession, you know, like I get sick, then after a few days I get better, but then after like 7, 8, 9 days I get sick again, in a cycle, until I got out of it and then started moving through my life with a purpose again. I remember from our socialist days in the former Yugoslavia that people were not rewarded with money, but people still tried to do a good job of what they did. And Several things that I remember from ex-Yugoslavia would maybe surprise people in the West, but for example, we had an absolutely amazing postal system. Like for example, you could mail anything from any little village of Yugoslavia to any other little village in Yugoslavia, and that thing would be at its address in about a day or two. Like you could literally take a plastic bucket full of liquid. Like we used to receive wine in the military like that. Like we get like a 20 liter bucket of wine, and they would just put on with a marker the address, and within a day and a half we had it in the barracks, and it was mailed from some village on the other side of the country. It was super cheap, right? There were no all these extra overnight, $40 per parcel rates. It was super cheap. It worked phenomenally well. We had clean water, trash, like social services were very, very well taken care of. And it wasn't because anybody had a profit motive in this system at all. It was just the people who were doing those jobs really deeply cared about doing a good job. So the society was generally very well functioning and surprisingly well in some ways. Today we copy pasted the Western, parliamentary democracy system and the Western this neoliberal economic system, and shit's falling apart at the seams. The postal system, like, I don't know, like you cannot receive your parcel for 3 weeks sent within the same city. Okay. A lot of people report that they never receive their stuff, or they get empty envelopes and empty parcels. Water used to be clean, unquestioned. Now suddenly we're starting to get those notices that, oh, you should boil your water, you shouldn't drink it, right out of the tap. Trash used to be a social service. It was taken away regularly. It never used to be an issue. Like, people just didn't know that trash really existed once you dumped it in the dumpster. Well, now it's a major issue. We have the trash mafia, people who became very, very rich on trash, taking away trash service, and trash is all over the place, and it's a disaster. They've created a disaster. It's become a lot more expensive, and there's a lot more trash everywhere in the cities. So yeah, to make the long story short, I entirely agree with you. But I think that generally the discussion about how we can make things better is a big one. And I think it's not just the education. I think it's principally the system of incentives that we have, and the system of how credit is created and how credit is allocated. And I think this is where the whole trick is, because I think that the human creativity and genius is literally in every single one of us. As you said, it kind of gets beat out of us by culture and education, where they tell you, okay, don't do, do sensible things so that you can make a good living, but don't do all this stuff that you like to do but is a waste of time. And that's because credit is flowing towards these certain professions where, like if you're a chartered accountant, if you're a lawyer, if you're a, policeman, I guess, you can make a decent living. But if you're going to go play your guitar and write music, then, maybe not so easy. If we manage to wrest control over how credit is created and allocated, we could overcome all of that. And the big mystery really rests on the concept of real savings. And real saving is basically the surplus that we create, because the human society today is mind-bogglingly productive, right? So I don't know, when you go back to the native communities, maybe, to these nomads, basically the whole community worked full on to make a living. It was comfortable, but everybody was applied. And then when we settled down, when we started doing agriculture and animal husbandry, then we start creating a surplus, which means that not everybody has to work all the time. So now somebody in the community can say like, hey, you know, I think I want to build a bridge, because if we can cross the river to the other valley, we could, you know, maybe plant more crops. And then since the community has a surplus, they can say like, okay, you know, Ricky, go take a squad and build that bridge. And once you build that bridge, then our community becomes even more productive. The surplus is even greater because now we've conquered the next valley where we plant even more stuff. Now even fewer people have to work. There's going to be more of us, and we can devote ourselves to, you know, poetry and music and build a library and a park and so forth. And so the trick is who allocates the real saving, the access to the surplus that the society creates, and for what purpose? And you can't answer this question until you really look into the mirror and ask yourself who we are and what we're here for and what we want to do with our lives. And it's not full employment, and it's not economic growth, because that doesn't make sense. It's something else, except we've been tricked by the full employment and economic growth into like, you know, keeping in the hamster wheel and thinking that this is what we're supposed to do, and this is how we're going to be fed, and this is how we're going to raise our families, and afraid of that hamster wheel stopping because we don't know what happens next. But we have to always fall back on the realization that we're amazingly productive, we're mind-bogglingly productive, and we can rearrange everything. But we have to understand A, ourselves, B, the nature of credit and circulation, and C, is going to be probably a bloody struggle to wrest control over that mechanism from the bankers, because they will set the world on fire to retain control over it and to enslave us all. So that's all I had to say about that.
You know, and I think, you know, part of it is they don't want people to have extra time to think about these issues, because if you have extra time to think about these issues, well, then now you have time to think about how you're being played, how the world really works. And so if you're just stuck in a rat race wondering how you're going to feed your family, then your mind is constantly on that. It's on how to pay bills. It's how to, you know, on Maslow's basic hierarchy of needs, how to make sure we don't get, you know, evicted next month when the, you know, the CARES Act runs out.
Because during the lockdown, it's a perfect example of what you're saying, Tim, because so many people who went on with their everyday lives, they were going to work, taking care of their kids, doing their everyday chores. The vaccine debate was like way over here. It was like, you know, out of their range of vision. It was like, oh, yeah, people are arguing about it, but I don't know anything about either side. The TV tells me that the science is settled, whatever, you know, but they didn't, how much thought are the people who even bought into like Bill Gates being a good guy or the vaccine debate was settled? How many of those people actually spend time investigating into it? None. And a lot of it is because lack of time time to actually sit down and like reflect, think about these issues any deeper than what the TV's telling you. And then during the lockdown, what do we see? We see the pandemic documentary going viral. I had it sent to me by a lot of people that I'm like, whoa, this is like a type of person that I expected never to even click on this link and be curious about this at all. And now they're actually curious enough to watch it and send it to me. So I think, like you said, that idea, it's so dangerous to give people that time. And really, when you think about like technology, right, like progression, like we keep creating tools and technology we're supposed to get more free time, right? Because now instead of me walking to work, I can drive to work. So that means I can, you know, spend more time doing something else I enjoy, or I can work on my computer. So now I can, I don't have to do, you know, whatever. We created a gun instead of a bolt.
And now you're not allowed to go to work. So now you can save even more time because we just do it all through Zoom. Or maybe 10 years from now, Alex can buy me a drink when we self-drive to work. You know, I don't know.
So what happened, right? So what happened was that the technology was supposed to give us more free time to think and ponder and reflect. And instead, things keep getting faster and more convenient and whatever, but it just keeps taking more and more of our time. When
Well,
now people never punch out of work. I mean, it's a weekend. You didn't look at your emails. What the hell's wrong with you, Rick? Like, you're supposed to look at your emails. I emailed you Saturday. I'm with my fucking family Saturday. I'm not gonna look at my, but that's the world we live in. Where like before you worked from 9 to 5, now you work from like 9 for forever, 9 till you're dead, and then you aren't ever supposed to punch out. You don't have time to eat. You eat on the go. What do you mean? Oh, you just get something on the go. I skip my lunch. In Europe, skipping your lunch is looked down upon. What the fuck are you saying? Skipping your lunch? That's like it's unheard of. Here, like everybody eats on the go. So it's almost like
actually I did skip my lunch to be a part of this, so I just had like a little shake. So I did.
I actually fast all day, so I don't even eat lunch. So I'm being a hypocrite myself. But my point is, I still enjoy. Like, I think there's the importance of like having that time to reflect and ponder and all these things, and yet we've been trapped in like Alex said, this wheel of like we keep running in place. We work a job we hate to buy shit we don't need, then we have to work more of that job we hate to pay off the shit that we don't need, but then we don't like
to impress people we don't even like. With
Well, it comes down like where it starts. It starts with the monetary supply and currency itself. When you continuously print more and more of it, and you have to, with the current structure, you have to get more and more people indebted in order to keep it more, longer and longer alive. So you actually do enslave people in that way. It's just a natural outcome of the whole system. There's no way out of it. Like, we can't get rid of the system until we actually get rid of the monetary system that is, we base society upon. If we don't get rid of it, we're gonna.
And the amount of knowledge
we could. Yeah.
And I mean, the amount of knowledge you have to have in order to
us-
figure that out is just like so immense, and the amount of free time and going down the right rabbit holes, which now you can't even go down those rabbit holes on YouTube. But I mean, there was this whole education system is a Prussian indoctrination system where even the former assistant of education, Charlotte Iserby, wrote a book called The Deliberate Dumbing Down of America, and she was married into Skull and Bones. Her grandpa, I think, I think her husband and her husband and her son, I think, were both in Skull and Bones, and she, had the blueprints to basically do what the plan was, and she, basically said it's to create good little yes men and good little worker bees, and then even if you have time to think, well, then now you've been attacked through the water and the fluoride that attacks your pineal gland, and you've gotten different vaccines that have now, attacked other areas of your thinking, and who knows what the heck this new vaccine is going to end up doing, and then you don't have time, and then if you do have time, you're out, looking at Netflix and looking at bullshit instead of things that can actually help solve the world. And then you go and somebody like, the people on this podcast, we go and tell family members this stuff, and you're never a prophet in your own village, and they try to shut you down even quicker than anybody. And, when I started my career in 2008, which was, a great day, literally September 15th, 2008 is when I started my career as a financial advisor, the day Lehman Brothers crashed. And I spent a lot of time basically making no money, becoming, a big geek on all this stuff, but I had time. And so I used that time efficiently. So now I'm at the point now where I've got the knowledge, but I spent a lot of time acquiring the knowledge. And then last year, my dad's like, wait a minute, this is January of this year, and I had my best year I ever had last year. And this year is like way better than last year. But 2018, I lost my job for daring to speak about Bitcoin at a conference. So I was forced to resign. And so my dad in January, he's like, Tim's like, let me get this straight. He's like, you have a practice where most of your clients are, hardcore libertarians or anarchists. I'm like, yeah, pretty much. And he goes, and let me get this straight. He goes, and they have to be in the Bitcoin. I'm like, well, they don't have to be, but it helps. He's like, that's the dumbest thing ever. He's like, my friend, and I'm just going to make up a name here, Fred, wants to invest with you, but Fred saw what you posted on Facebook. And he's like, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard in he's like, that's the dumbest strategy ever. And I would never invest with somebody that has these beliefs. I'm like, well, I'd like to, argue against your 1987 marketing class that you don't know what you're talking about. And then I remember like in March, I made quite a bit of money. I'm like, hey dad, like, boom, just made more than you're going to make all year in 1 month, and then did the same thing last month. And he's like, you don't have to be such an effing asshole about it. I'm like, well, you literally tried to, like, I've gotten through all the trials and tribulations and finally gotten to the point where I've got successful. You want me to stop doing all the things that got me here and then go back to the old thing I was doing that wasn't working? So you're never a prophet in your own village. And it's the people closest to you that you're worried about, offending or not doing things their way. But, everybody's fighting the last war. Nobody, everything, I graduated in 2008 and nobody at the time was talking about, social media marketing. And even 2015, a company I was with, was all bragging about how they got LinkedIn and now the advisors can use LinkedIn. I'm like, oh, congratulations, everybody, that's just like the lowest barrier. And all the advisors at the times like, oh, having a website, that's stupid. And trying to, let alone talking about podcasts or YouTube. That's so far. So you're never, it's not to hype me up. It's just that you're never, being a trailblazer, you have to get a lot of the arrows thrown at you, and people closest to you are always going to try to shoot you down. But then even if you even get to the point of making that journey, so it's so hard because you're getting stopped at every single turn. And even if you are successful, then people then are still trying to shoot you down, and so it's just a never ending struggle. And then people then get, in their own echo chambers where they don't know anybody else like this, and they're not on YouTube, or they're not, don't have, not that we have like that much presence, but we do talk with a lot of people who understand what we're saying. And so it's a little bit different from us and the person that's, sitting at their house in Iowa, and not talking about Jason Burmis, but, just talking about someone that's sitting at their house in Iowa that has no one else that they know that knows about this stuff, and they feel all alone, and then they don't want to share it. And then they go see a sign at their, their shop that says you've got to wear a mask, and they just wear a mask because it's, they don't want to have to deal with all the BS, because and Charlie Robinson, said it best in his podcast with David Icke, there's no 90-second boil down to try to tell somebody what's going on with the coronavirus without sounding crazy, because there's so many aspects of it you have to understand. Like, you have to understand the Bill Gates aspect of it and where he came from, and understanding the, the agenda 30, agenda 20, and then all the different things that, the event 201, and the entire monetary system. And just, there's so many things you'd have to give yourself a primer on before you can even have an educated opinion on this. And then if you do get successful, then they just delete your YouTube channel, like what happened to World Alternative Media with, Josh and John, who started that. And I came on, later on. But, if you get successful, then boom, they shoot you down. They shot down my, my Facebook channel, and a lot of people, I'm sure a lot of our favorite channels that we go to have already been stopped. And so it's this deliberate dumbing down of America that's gone on in the entire world. And at least with the pandemic, at least now more people are being homeschooled. Even my ex-wife, who is a school psychologist, super indoctrinated into this, even she's now finally coming around to, they're talking about getting forced vaccines. I'm like, oh, only if your, ex-husband wasn't talking about that, 6 fucking months ago, that when let's have like a contingency plan for that. And now she's like, oh yeah, we should try to figure this out. I'm like, yeah.
Well, here's an idea that, I contemplate this a lot. If we actually, like, we talk about, like, with, creation of Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, talk about decentralization, but how about applying that to the whole society? How about decentralizing, learning, so you don't even have to, have a central authority on it anymore that controls it? How about empowering kids to go and, as you said, Alex, go and find, or Rika said, go and find your passion, and try to really, like, help them, along that way. Like, go and look for what is your kids, your nieces and nephew, what are they interested in at one point, and then try to help them towards that way, instead of like being forced into a kettle a kettle into the slaughter when you send a lot of kids to school these days, right? So empowering that, and then also have a stable system, having a stable medium of exchange that doesn't loses or gain value, implementing that, but also having everything decentralized, food supply, power. Think about empowering people, having decentralized power at almost every single house in the world, or having food available at almost every single house in the world. We could cure starvation in an instant with that. You could create kids that would be able to cooperate in today's world. Like, think about it, we live in a world where we're so interconnected. We could have Elon Musk's coming up everywhere, and kids like that, musical geniuses coming up everywhere, because they were interconnected. They could talk to each other, they could create networks and so on to educate themselves without the need of having a teacher saying that, oh, you need to know this or that. They could get themselves taught on the basics. They don't need a central authority to really do that. That's what really YouTube started to do until they started to control it, of course. So you need to, if we can save this planet, we need to really seriously consider decentralizing everything down to the tiny little governance of a city or a town. That's small. We don't need nation states. But you have the interconnectedness of being able to communicate with everybody else anyways. That's just a thought, and we could go so deep into it, but we don't have time now to do it. But I think that's kind of a way towards that type of solution to save
especially since we all skipped lunch. Yeah.
Well, but isn't the I guess the argument is probably what Richard Wolff would be arguing is you need some type of I don't want to use the word government, but some type of community coming together and saying, hey, we need clean water, we need this service or that service. Could we go to one extreme or the other, or is the answer always going to be some balance, some ratio of a little bit of some socialist idea, hey, let's all contribute for this as a society, contribute for this service, clean water, and then have less government in regards to other things?
This is what I think is you can have both, but you not necessarily have to have them at the same community. That's what voluntarism comes in. Have the socialist people over here, they could do whatever they want with their life, and then you have the I'm an anarcho-capitalist over here, building our society over here, but we could still communicate. We still have the technological grid, and we could trade and exchange with each other goods and services, whatever. It's just that you can't force upon, this is where the political system comes in, that just destroys and eviscerates communities throughout history, worlds and nations throughout history. Is we need to have the choices where the local community could actually set their own rule sets and not be governed by anybody else. I think that's the most important thing that we need to accomplish. If we can do anything the next 50 years for humanity, I think it would be that. Having the possibility.
And look at how great a job they've done with the current water situation. I mean, you got places like in Michigan where the water is catching on fire, or other places where they've been doing all sorts of fracking, and even here in Arizona, I mean, the water comes out of the tap between 500 and 600 parts per million. For the past 6-7 years, I've been growing food on a hydroponic, tower garden, and and basically, if you were to just feed it regular tap water, the plants would rather die than just have the plant water. So I have to have a filter before it even goes.
I have groundwater.
And so instead of spending millions of dollars putting fluoride into the water, which used to be, I think that traces back to the company Alcoa, the aluminum company of America. It was a byproduct of the aluminum industry, and so instead of
get rid of it.
So instead of having to pay to get rid of it, we pay them to go put it in and poison us, and then you get into who the first people into that, and who were the scientists in America, and all this stuff I've already forgotten by now. But I think it was the same scientist at the University of Rochester who said that asbestos is safe, was the same one that says that fluoride was safe. And even though it's just one little thing, then you go into tooth decay and all these different rates in Europe where they don't fluoridate, and their teeth are even better. Obviously, notwithstanding England over there, and there's other reasons why that's been messed up through government. But look at, so I have water filters here where I just do it myself, or I go and buy water that's through pH raised and better for alkalinity. And that's another thing I never talk about. What's the pH of your blood? What's what different frequencies are around you, and all sorts of other interesting things that could, I don't say either cures, but
we don't need schools. We don't need schools to do that, right? We need kids and people to actually be able to ask those questions and go and do all the research themselves. As they're not, if we do complete reset, there's no debt anymore. And then you can you could create your own debt systems if you really want that. Over time, you will destroy it again if you try to. But you could borrow as much as you want. You could create all these systems, but don't try to force a 49% to 51% to control a 49% that have the total opposing views. You need to divide that group up. Sorry to say this, but I don't think they could get along on a scale that we really hope that they can, because There's people that love individualism, love self-control over their own lives, and don't want any government interference, all this stuff. And then you have the other ones that, you know, would like some services and all this stuff that would be taken care of. We need to just be able to live our own lives, but we can still communicate. Like, we live in the 20th century. It's not no 21st century. It's not that we live, you know, in like 200 years ago. Today, like, these ideas have become more and more plausible as we are becoming so technologically advanced. We could use these technologies to totally enslave or totally free ourselves as well, like any technology.
What do you think, Alex?
No, I completely agree, and very sensible ideas. I'm not sure. I'm not sure, however, if I explained well enough the concept of real savings. What I meant by that is that you know, like when we create surplus economically, you know, so everybody eats, everybody has a roof over their head, everybody is dressed, everybody is educated, and so on, taken care of. That there's actual real surplus resources that can be used for whatever, by which I wanted to distinguish it from paper debt. That's you know, like, and then, you know, okay, so let's say that theoretically, to allow access to this surplus, you would, let's say, print up some receipts, and then if somebody in the society said, okay, we're going to build a dam, then you give them these receipts so that they can pay themselves, so that they can secure, you know, food, shelter, whatever it is that they need. So they're effectively their paychecks, and the resources come from what's really there. So that's what I meant by real savings. Now, if you take those receipts, the certificates, and you start printing up a lot of them, lending them to people at interest, because you're counting that they are going to create the additional surplus, that they're going to be able to pay it back with interest and so forth, then you're starting to squander the real savings. But what's worse than that is that some agency decides what is going to be spent on, what is going to be invested in. So I don't know, like, let's say we're in this community, and I say, look, I think I want to go and build a bridge across the river, and maybe you say, I want to dam the river, I want to build a dam, or somebody else says, I want to build a church. Well, you know, we
want to build an F-35 to blow up the bridge.
Yeah, no, but what I mean is, you know, like there has to be some mechanism of decision making, and allowing that a certain amount of these real savings gets used up, and not more than that. So you need a way to measure what is the actual wealth of a society. And I wanted to mention something because I haven't been able to dig deep into it, but this is potentially, if I'm right, but like I only have like a vague intuition about this, but like I read at one point about 2 years ago, the new Russian prime minister. So he became prime minister after he created this new tax system in Russia, right? And so apparently this new tax system is something that's so insanely sophisticated that it's a bit of a sci-fi miracle. Basically, apparently every transaction is being recorded, taxes are automatically being accounted for, deducted, paid, whatever, and this is all happening pretty much in real time. And the government, the treasury, has the real-time, very granular feedback about what's going on in the economy, so that they see what's being produced, what's being sold at what prices in the real time. Now, what this does is this could be like a quantum leap if this technology is what I think it is, and if it starts to get adopted by other societies and other nations, because basically at some level you can measure the real savings now, and then you can see immediately where, you know, like if prices of something are starting to go up, that, you know, there's a shortage of something, so you can decide, aha, we need more wheat or insulin or you know, transistor radios, whatever. Or you can decide to start investing into the alternative to whatever it is that's in short supply. If something's not selling, if something's running low, if something is oversupplied, you see all that in real time. And so, yeah, there's always a question of deciding what gets done, what gets allocated to where, who makes the decisions. But if the thing is transparent, let's say you put it all on websites so that everybody can see, then I don't know, maybe you can somehow crowdsource the decision making. But this is something that over the following months I'd like to read into. I asked some friends in Russia if they could find me some English language white papers about this to see if I understood what this is correctly. But this could be a game changer. And then there's the Edward Case. I don't know if you guys heard of Edward Case. He was like a mystic in the 1930s who said that I forget, it's somewhere in my book, but basically that some kind of a new liberation, emancipation, freedom for humanity and prosperity is going to come out of Russia. And so let's see, maybe that's it.
Yeah, that's interesting. If you find any more of that stuff, if you find it in English, send it to me.
Okay.
Blockchain sounds like blockchain. Like you could build out with a blockchain if you wanted to. Not that I want to live in that society, but yeah, you definitely could.
Which society?
No, like I don't like central control in that way. So like I would like is there you could have a free market approach to the same thing. And get the government completely out of the way because government has always been in the way of you know, setting up things. So like what you could do is you could have businesses, not corporations that we're talking about, you know, today. Corporations are you know, legal entities that are set up so, you know, they can get away with whatever. And the problem too is you have a fake monetary system that runs everything, so it corrupts everything that it touches. So if you can remove the government completely, have competing currencies, whatever you want, you can you know, get with today's technologies. It's so simple to allocate resources with a total free market.
You know, I don't disagree with you, but I you know, like I've been educated in the American Western, you know, I studied economics. I completely drank up the Kool-Aid. But you know, like as I observe things, I'm questioning again this aversion to governments, because I think rather than being a blanket rejection, it needs to be a bit more nuanced. Because, you know, like as I mentioned, going back to the former Yugoslavia, some of the things, these government-controlled entities, they functioned in a way that is world-class at today's level. And then when you look at things like the Swiss railways, it's a government-controlled company. It's a work of art. It's not profitable, but it doesn't matter. It lowers the cost of transactions for the whole society. Okay, so it doesn't matter whether that entity itself is profitable or not. Japanese railways. There's a lot of systems in the world that are run and controlled by governments that are extremely well managed and extremely useful to the society. And I don't think it stands to reason that everything private is better and that everything government is worse. So I think there's...
No, like I think you're getting it wrong. Like I'm talking about private with full competition, not private monopolies. Because if you want to privatize anything and putting it into one corporation's hand, you're just doing the same thing as the government did. It's a total same thing.
Yeah, but aren't we always going to have issues with the profit incentive? Because corporations really, or a business in general, I mean, not all, just like not all government departments are run by corrupt people who really
monetary system. I read about this in my book. You could find it in the end of Freedom of Our Monetary System Enslaves Us, where the corporation, the reason why corporations get corrupted is because they got to pay dividends to their investors. When they have to pay dividends to their investors, they got to make a profit. And the profit has to be greater and greater because the inflation is continuing to go up because we keep on printing more money. So they're getting forced basically by the fake monetary system into doing implicit and illicit activities in order to make that possible. And that's one of the biggest issues is that, they're getting pushed by, again, your measuring stick that you're measuring, activity with, it's like, let's build a house with, something that suddenly a meter becomes 2 meters and 3 meters. So like, as you're building the house, all the measurements changes. Like you can't like build society with that.
So you're talking about infinite growth, just constantly.
No, I'm not. We don't necessarily need growth in the that's the problem. The growth comes from the need to continuously print more money. If we don't print more money, we don't get growth. See, you don't need necessarily the type of growth that we're
And it's
getting
all based
taught
on
because,
debt.
yeah, it's all based upon the underlying system, and that's why you need the growth, because if you don't have it, the whole system collapses like a deck of cards.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, is it as simple as, and I've said this on the show before, like the left thinks corporations are the root of all evil, the right thinks government's the root of all evil, and the one thing they all have in common is they're run by people.
They're both
So
corporations, by the way.
Well, they are, but I still think, okay, so you don't even have to talk about government and politics. You can talk about just about any aspect. You can talk about sports. Okay, there's people who are going to cheat. So my point is, like, there's always going to be people who are going to find, who don't have the best moral compass, who are going to find ways to manipulate the system or do things for only themselves. So in other words, like, are these things inherently evil, or there's always going to be ways that, or there are always going to be people who are going to find ways to manipulate it or use it for their gain and whatnot? Because you can use examples, like I've had the attorney from the DuPont case where they exposed C8 and the Teflon scandal. I mean, they hid that research because of money, because they,
because they could pay more dividends to their investors. Right?
But okay, so I own, or I don't own, my parents own a small business, and I help run it. We deal with a lot of small businesses. If there's some people who run great moral small businesses, there's others, local restaurants, who will, put some bread out on a table and take that bread off because nobody ate it and put it on the next table. So they'll find ways.
Back when there was still local restaurants.
When there was still local restaurants. My point is, like, when you're motivated by making money, that you can also make the argument that there's going to be bad things that come out of that too, if that means disposal.
Oh, you're not living. Yeah, no, you're not going to live in a utopia. Never. But
No,
the problem is if you start.
It's not just because it's government, or it's not just because they're public. I think those issues would exist even if they weren't public companies, and if there wasn't government. There's always going to be people who are going to be motivated by making more money, by profit, and if that means maybe using a chemical in their food that's an additive or a preservative that makes their food last longer, but they're not sure if it's harmful, but for the time being, like, hey, we're not going to spend money researching to find out a chemical we're using is harmful, so let's just continue to use it. They will, right? Because,
but
do you get what I'm saying?
I what John was saying a minute ago is it's not about whether people are nice or not nice, and it's not about people's moral compass. It's just that the nature of monetary system dictates the incentives, right? So like, you always have this fiat currency that goes into circulation, the principal, which you have to repay with interest, right? And so there's always a shortage of actual cash with which to repay. So the pressure is on everybody in the system to generate in money terms, to generate profits. And so there's always great pressure to be profitable, to cut corners always, to like to you know, like to run a profitable business, basically you have to put the price as high as you can and put your cost as low as it can, which, you know, like if you can't raise the price enough because you have competition, then you have to lower the costs. And lowering the cost means that, you know, like instead of using premium chicken in your restaurant, you're using the lowest cost battery chicken, which means that the lowest
or
cost,
cutting employees, right? Like,
yeah, or that. But you know, like then that means that the person who can provide you the lowest cost chicken will get your business, and the person who can provide you the lowest cost chicken is going to be the one that treats chickens the most horribly and feeds them the cheapest crap, which will then in turn, you know,
it's a vicious
generate.
cycle.
Yeah, it's a vicious cycle that it's like a race to the bottom, which kind of dictates that everything, including the way people behave about these things, is going to kind of go down to its lowest common denominator in everything, you know. So you're going to have all the cost externalized, you're going to have a lot of pollution, you're going to have, you know, like the cheapest junk when you go to the restaurant, you know, and so the whole system is dictated by this monetary system. And so I think, John, if I'm correct, that's what you were alluding to before when you were talking about the fact that, you know, corporations are essentially they're obliged to misbehave because that's the system in which they function.
Oh, 100%. Like it's because you're corrupted the monetary system itself. You corrupt everything that touches that monetary system.
Yeah, it's like
everything that starts to handle and use it.
Yeah, but in my defense, I'm an idiot. So I'm just letting you guys know. Sometimes it takes me a second to kind of grasp what you meant. But I get absolutely. After hearing Alex expand on that. Yeah, I mean, that does make sense. But I guess you know, like you said, is there a solution? You know, is there ever going to be some perfect, you know, and there are people who do believe that. I mean, you guys who do believe a completely anarcho-libertarian world would just solve all the world problems and, you know, it would just resolve itself. And
I don't think the whole world, like that's the problem where I think everybody's running into is that we believe that, oh, my views, I have to push them out to everybody. That's why, like the voluntarist way, you know, me and Tim, we were good buddies with a guy, Ernest Hancock, you know him as well. Ernest is a voluntarist. Like he wants you to have whatever society you want, but don't try to force it on everybody else, and live by a non-aggressive principle. Now that might be a utopian world, but it is the best possible way, I think, to live for the future if we want, you know, not to end up in a nuclear holocaust. With this current system, because that's where we're moving towards. If we, you know, you got the Turfin's dilemma where you have a world, you know, raising world power here, and then you have the current world power. You know, at one point it's going to be like the Sung dynasty at its peak. You know, the Qin dynasty, the Mongols came and attacked them when they were at the weakest with their currency, and we're seeing the same kind of thing starting to happening with the United States as well, where their currency is weakening. And they're, you know, a lot weaker than they were. So now is the time to move in and make your, you know, the kill onto an empire and really weaken it, you know, a lot harder going forward. And that is economic warfare. You know, but I really are worried that, you know, there's economists out there with PhDs that, you know, told me here in Winnipeg, from the university, told me that, you know, what saved the world out of Great Depression? It was a war. And he seriously believed that that was a great solution. Like I asked him, it's like, so like people murdering each other was a great thing for the world. It's like, yeah, we saved the economy.
Yeah,
that's what they teach.
He's an idiot. Okay, so
Yeah.
that's you know, like, and I'm, you know, like I'm glad because one of the things that come out of this Corona cycle is that finally I think it has shown that, you know, people with PhDs aren't necessarily terribly smart. In fact, a lot of them are absolute fucking idiots. But you know, like I think that we have a lot of studying and researching to do, and there's a lot of stuff that we don't know because one of the things that has been distorted in this 300-year experiment with fiat currencies is the human nature itself, and we don't even really know what we might be like outside of this, you know, matrix. But you know, it'll be interesting to study how
people like the how do you call them, the Mennonites and the Amish live, you know, how their economic system functions. There has been,
we do have a bunch of them. I have a colony just south of me here, by the
yeah,
way.
I swear I'd like to live with them for a year just to, you know, like you can see documentaries, you can kind of like tell what it's about, but I would like to get a sense of myself in that, you know, like what changes. Certain pressures drop off, certain things come back online. But you know, not to dwell on that, you know, like then we had like a period.
Interesting. I just want to add, it's interesting how they actually it sounds like a lot of people look at the way their way of life and like, oh, that would be torture. They give when the children get older, they give them the ability to leave for a little bit and come back if they want. And I think like some ridiculous high percentage always comes back. Like, go back. If you think the world out there is better than the world we live in our culture, then go explore that culture. And I think it's like 90% or something like that actually come back and prefer their simple lifestyle that they have. So that tells you something about human nature and what we maybe really want and need.
Yeah.
Or how we're brought up as well. Yeah, how we're brought up as human beings, you know, that's all we know, kind of thing. And you know, it'd be very hard for your brain to comprehend what's out there. So that's also another thing why people will come back,
community,
right?
Or is it community, right? Because how much of it's because you go to, you know, the city life, it sounds great, but the guy who bumps into you walking by is too busy worried about his life that he isn't.
No, I'm saying, you know, like this is the thing, you know, like I think we're going to learn like decentralization is the thing, and living in communities again, you know, going back to it. I'm not saying that we have to live super simple. We got technology today. We could build, like we could travel to Mars, do whatever we want, but we need to get back to, you know, that type of state. As you know, human beings, because that's when I believe that we're more at our most creative and can do best to the world. Together with like having money, like we need things to exchange with each other, all this stuff. Like but there's other people that might totally differ, like the Mennonites and people that you know don't believe in what I believe in, but they should be allowed to do exactly what they want. But I should also be allowed to do exactly what I want.
Well, I think that libertarian, it's funny because I remember when Ron Paul was running, a lot of people would be like, oh, you know, his ideas are too radical. And I'm like, this is a great trick to get you to keep voting in the same shit over and over again, because anybody who's too radical or anybody who's different is too radical. So let's just keep voting in the same guy. Then we'll keep getting disappointed and wondering why we keep getting disappointed, because we keep saying anybody else who actually has different ideas is too radical. But in so many cases when I would hear people say that, I'd be like, well, what's so radical about the idea of like, you have the right to pursue happiness, right? And I have the right to pursue happiness. As long as I don't get in the way with your right and you don't get away with my right, we can all go hand in hand. I'm not telling you how to live your life. And so it's like most people, if you simplify it to that manner, it's like, wait, you have some libertarian views, because if you agree with that statement, you have some. So it's the idea that the libertarian philosophy and whatnot is like too extreme to ever be accepted by the majority, I think is ridiculous. Because I think if you actually tell them what the ideas are and you actually talk to them, it sounds very simple and easy to understand. And I think that's for the most part, that's all we want, is like, just let me live my life. Don't force your way of life, your thinking or your philosophy onto me, and I won't do the same to you. And we can all live among each other and just be fine, you know?
I
also want to point out that the Libertarian Party is a complete joke, and do not conflate the Libertarian Party with what it means to be libertarian. I mean, I'm a delegate for the fucking Libertarian Party and didn't even vote Libertarian because all they're doing is, you know, kowtowing to the left. You've got the guys at the very top, like Nick Sarwark. Actually, he's not at the top anymore because he got.
Well, it's all political, Tim. Like, it's all the political system.
The Libertarian Party is a joke, and it's just, you know, a country club of a bunch of, you know, mainly a lot of old guys, you know, a bunch of 65-year-olds who don't know how any of the world actually works, and they're all in there, you know, circle jerking each other and have no idea that the world outside of their own libertarian bubble, that are people that consider themselves libertarian, is much, much bigger than what's in the party. And so, you know, and there's a lot of people who do think like that. So if you're listening to this and don't, and think, oh, I've heard people in the party say some dumb stuff. Well, the party is whoever shows up, and you get a bunch of people from the left who then, basically show up and try to hijack things, and then we end up with what we're in right now. But you had mentioned too before, bad people in psychopaths getting involved in corporations or something like that, maybe like 15, 20 minutes ago. Well, the problem is they also get involved being regulators. They get involved in government, the worst people, and so you basically always have the fox guard in the hen house, and pretty much in every single regard. You mentioned DuPont before. I mean, DuPont is the reason there's the reason marijuana is illegal. That's a whole nother, subject, but you get back, but it's the DuPont family is 100% has their, hands all over that, but that's a whole nother rabbit hole. But yeah, we're always in this struggle. If there's actually something called the Nolan chart, which is a test, if you want to type in, I think it's world's smallest political quiz or economic quiz or something like that. Now they change it, and they've, even more social justice worded even that. But most people take this little quiz, and what they find out at the end of the quiz is that they are libertarians. A lot of people, they just don't understand it. But the problem is messaging, and now they wanted to, vote in Joe Jorgensen, who, has a super weak message of, oh, if you just trim government a little bit here and a little bit there, like, you know what, it's well past that. We're in 2020. They're trying to jam down a complete technocracy down our throat. They're going for the jugular. They're going for broke this time. And the message should be hardcore, calling out both parties, calling out the media, calling out all this stuff, sort of like a Donald Trump type strategy. But instead, it's just very, mamsy-pamsy. Let's just try to placate to the left. And so for the people out there, don't conflate what it means to be, libertarian with the Libertarian Party, because the Libertarian Party is a joke. And I invite anybody from the Libertarian Party, except I don't even want to waste my time with them, because most of them are a bunch of losers who have no idea how any of the world works. So that's going to be my campaign speech when I run for Libertarian Party.
Well, Ricky, I don't know about the time that we have left, but I really gotta probably get going right away. So
same. So well, first of all, thanks guys for joining me and having this discussion. My brain melted halfway through it, but I try to keep up with you guys. But I like the fact that we kind of ended it on a more human aspect of it, because I think all the stuff we discussed, it's all super important, but I think sometimes just talking about human tendency and cultures and just finding these solutions, these bigger questions, I think are very important. But it also comes down to the stuff that we started talking about, which is just the power of debt and the system itself. How do you fix something that's inherently broken and corrupt? So but yeah, can we tell people where they can find your work? I know a lot of you guys, Tim's always moving around. You just left Facebook, I believe, and now you're
I'm about to, but yeah, we John and I just started. I mean, it's still a work in progress, like everything else. But it's timandjohnshow.com, and you go there, and pretty soon we'll have the links for John's stuff there too. But up there, what we started doing is we're going to have the first videos are going to be released to our email subscribers on a self-hosted video platform, not YouTube or BitChute or Library, although you can find us there too while we still exist. And we just interviewed one of the co-founders of SpaceX, where we're getting into all sorts of deep stuff that you wouldn't necessarily think that a co-founder of SpaceX would be getting into. Also, Richard Grove, who needs no introduction, but probably one of the top researchers out there in the world. And the people who are subscribed to us got that information first, and so you can sign up for our email blast over there. Or if you want any of my I'm also a financial advisor for people in the United States, where we do more outside the box type things. You can find me there at thelibertyadvisor.com. And then John and I do stuff at timandjohnshow.com. And there has, links where you can get on our podcast, get on, all sorts of different things that we're up to. We're usually doing about 2 videos a week in addition to Union of the Unwanted. And thank you for, including us on that. But yeah, no, we're a small little show, just getting started, but even that, we've got some, awesome guests. We've had Gio Griffin was one of the first guests, one of SpaceX co-founders, Richard Grove. We're just knocking it out of the park with, straight killers every show so far. We'll have to get Ricky on to, and actually have Alex on as well too, but thank you.
Yeah, and you can find everything that I do at economictruth.org. That's the only other website than Tim and John Show. So I sell like reports, economic reports, trying to help people to understand things. And then I have 2 books that are like made in a simple language, so people don't get confused by all the economic jargon that's out there, because if you try to pick up any economics books, you'll like lose your mind and like throw it in the garbage right away. So like the one is called The End of Freedom: How Our Monetary System Enslaves Us. And then I have one specifically written on the Canadian economy, but I heard from other people in other, like all around the world that have been picking it up. They said like, well, this is like almost exactly like my country, how it works. So it's called Canada, the Greatest Economy in the World, question mark. And it's the facts you are not being told about your money and how to protect yourselves from the coming crisis, which we kind of are in right now.
And Alex, how can people connect with you and let them know about your book and you know, any social media platforms you're on?
Yeah, I have a Twitter handle, Naked Hedgie, at Naked Hedgie. I have a blog, thenakedhedgie.com. I have a website, iSystem Trend Following. So that's what I do, systematic trend following. Published 2 books, one on the Magnitsky Act and the Bill Browder affair, and the other one about trend following, mastering uncertainty in commodities trading. And yeah, I'm on Facebook. That's that.
And his Pornhub channel is also the Naked Hedgie, right? Naked Hedgie.
Yeah, only fans. No.
Well, thanks guys for joining me. We are gonna do another Union of the Unwanted next week, a week from today. I actually just got an email from Dr. Scott Jensen, who is supposed to join us. He's been on my show. He was the CDC death certificate whistleblower doctor who was you know,
Fantastic.
one of the first guys that was going around, you know, being outspoken about the fact that, hey, like the CDC gave me new guidelines and I've been writing death certificates for 40 years. They're supposed to be specific because of state funding and state statistics. And all of a sudden they're giving me these vague guidelines. So he's going to be joining us, and we have a bunch of other people working on. So if you guys are up for it, I know that, you know, it's a little late for Alex. So, but if you can, you know, join us.
If I can, it will be with pleasure. Yeah.
Yeah. We are planning on doing a European, episode where it's going to be probably like a Saturday afternoon or morning, or a Sunday afternoon or morning, and get some of our European people that we want to get on. You know, that might be a little easier for you, Alex. You know, we're attempting to get
because there's a lot of activists over in Europe. Like it's just in my home country, Norway, as well. There's a ton of great people that are standing up right now.
And you got Josh over in Africa too. Well,
yeah. He's going to be on, you know, the pyramid he's
he's been doing videos with Jimmy from Bright Insight, so he's been keeping busy the past week.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah, he's awesome. After you guys left the last episode, we talked for a while. It was fun. I mean, that's the thing about those big group conversations. They're fun, but I'm glad I get to do both, right? Because I think like when you have like just a small group like us, you can get a little deeper into certain topics, and I just feel like it's more personal. It's closer to like if we're at a pub hanging out.
Exactly.
You know, where those big conversations are good, because I think it is nice that everybody has different backgrounds, different websites they go to for research, different influences growing up, and they can bring all those things to the table and bring something interesting that maybe somebody else on the call didn't, you know, wasn't exposed to. So it's good that we kind of get to do both. We get a balance of both. So I think that they're both beneficial. So, but
I feel like a lot of the Q people have been very quiet ever since the election of jumping in there. But you know,
yeah. Well, I mean, I was open about the fact that I thought it was ridiculous. I mean, I mean, but I don't. Again, like this, I will defend their right to be ridiculous on Twitter and Facebook, you know, and YouTube. The fact that people thought they were such a threat that you had to ban them. We got
kicked off of Wham the same day all the Q people. We were talking bad about Q since day one. So I'm like, we got purged the same day as all them, and we were talking.
I guess the algo heard bad about Q. Like it just heard Q, and that's it.
Yeah, and a lot of people are very. I mean, it's like their first rabbit hole they went down. You know, so.
Oh, for sure, yeah. No, they woke up to this for the first time ever, right? So it's hard to when you do that. Like it's like overwhelming. You know, like think about the first times we woke up, right? Like it's quite the trip. Like mine is like 11 years. Tim's is like 2 decades almost. And I don't know about you, Alex, and Ricky. You guys must have had, like a long time in this as well. It starts very overwhelming, but then over time as you get into it, and like you talking about passion. This is my passion that I'm slowly building my way into.
Yeah, same here. Yeah. But thanks again, guys. I really appreciate it. Alex, get some sleep. Thanks for
I'm going now.
Have a good night.
I'm going now. I need my beauty sleep. I'm not.
Okay.
And hope
I'm not this good looking for nothing,
Okay.
It's that Croatian. It's that Croatian look. I work with like several Croatians.
Okay.
Okay. Have a good one, guys.
Same old. See you
Thanks for
guys.
having me on, Ricky.
Thank you. Bye. Take care.
All right, bye.